So one way to start is just to start at the beginning. That's not what I'm going to do. Instead, we'll do that after the break. In other words, after 90 minutes or so, we'll have a break, and then I'll start from the beginning. But I want to do an introduction to the whole thing. And of course, that's not possible, but there is a story in the middle of this that Plato wrote in order to condense everything that he wants to say. It's a very simple story, but if you understand that story, you understand everything important that he wants to say. And you may have heard about this, and I'm curious, it's okay if you haven't, but the story is called The Cave. So I'm just wondering, just to get a sense of people's familiarity with Plato, how many have heard of Plato's Cave? The cave.
I don't know.
What would it be in Japanese? Yes, one,
Cave, yeah.
two,
Yeah, I
three,
heard, yeah.
no, four. So most have heard of it. How many have read it? About half of those who have heard of it have read it. And okay, so it's okay.
ちょっとね紹介しておけば、白井さんはいろんなもろもろの手伝いをしてもらうのできてます。通訳もちょっとしてもらおうと思ってます。今日お二人でやってくれたらいいかな。
He just introduced about me.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes I'll help translate.
Oh,
and
yes.
Also,
宮本君ちょっと何を専門にしてるか一言、はい、できれば英語で。
I research higher education.
Yes.
Teacher training system.
Okay.
Graduate school.
Okay. So education, fisheries, gender, philosophy. Yes. Everything. Okay. So I'm going to talk about Plato's Cave. It's at the beginning, if you look at your text, it's at the beginning of book 7.
第7巻にね、洞窟の話って非常に有名な洞窟の比喩というやつやね。
So it might be
リュウさん
helpful
本持ってない？
if somebody has
これ
it.
を
ちょっと早めに手に入れてほしい。こう本がないと授業できないので。
Read for out loud the first sentence of book 7. In Japanese, I won't understand a word, but we'll talk about the translation of this sentence, which will be the most important sentence for this course.
第7巻の最初を読んでください。594ページ。
So there are numbers in the margins, even of the Japanese text. And in this case, it's 514A. Have you found that? Yes, okay. Let me just say a bit about these numbers and so on. So Plato writes in Greek, of course, and at the time, there weren't books like this. These were invented only in the Middle Ages, I'm not sure the exact year, but 1000 AD. Before that, they write on scrolls. And particularly the scrolls are there's no paper. It's papyrus. I don't know in Japanese what we use.
パピルス、パピルス。
パピルスの巻紙に昔は書
So
いて
you write on papyrus, and then you roll it up, but it can only be rolled so much before it cracks. So it can only be so long. And also, it's not practical. I mean, if you had one a mile long, you couldn't read that. Whereas you could have a book that's extremely thick, you could carry it around, but you couldn't read a papyrus that had. So the books, we call books, 10 books, they're actually 10 scrolls. Each book is a scroll.
10巻やね。
The thing is, Plato didn't write on the scrolls. Plato wrote on tablets, and it was people who translated it onto scrolls. The reason this isn't that important, but the reason it matters a little bit is that when Plato's writing, he's not writing book 1, then book 2, then book 3. Instead, he's just writing, and then later scribes divided it up into books based on how long the scrolls were. So sometimes they tried to make it end when it made sense to end, like a chapter. What is it in Japanese, a chapter?
Sure.
When you write a novel, if you're an author, you think chapter 1, and then it ends, and then you start something new, and so on. These books are not like that. The scribes tried, but it's not always the case. But here, book 7, we get the cave, and that's an important, very important thing, so it makes sense to start a book with that. But it's actually continuous with book 6, where there is something called the sun, and then the line, and then the cave. These are 3 analogies. What would you say in Japanese, analogy?
比喩
例え話みたいな。
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
これは有名な話なんで、洞窟の比喩とか太陽。
So book 6 ends with these 2 analogies, and book 7 starts with this. But to understand this, you need to know those as well. But that's okay. That's okay. We'll get to that later in the course. This stands alone, and it's a story. We say, for whatever reason, allegory. It's a short little story. Okay. These numbers were added in the 16th century in France. They didn't exist in the ancient world. And the reason, these are page numbers in the edition from the 16th century in France. But every edition around the world now uses those. Just like the Christian Bible has many books, Corinthians, Romans, Gospel of Matthew, and so on. But there are hundreds of translations into Japanese. There are hundreds of translations in English. And if Christians want to talk to each other, they can't say, look at page 6, look at page 22, because everybody has a different version. But they can use chapter and verse. Corinthians 3:18. That's what we do with Plato. We don't talk about page numbers. I mean, I couldn't say, go to page 54, because you don't, different page number. But I can say, go to 514a. And I guess I can say, go to book 7, too, because it's divided, yours is divided into books. That's good. But sometimes we want to be more precise, and I want to say, let's look at this line. Okay, so with that in mind, can somebody read the first line? Anybody can. Anybody. Just the first line.
最初の行。
では次にと僕は言った。教育と無教育ということに関連して、我々人間の本性を次のような状態に似ているものと考えてくれたまえ。
Okay, so I have no idea what that means. But Hiroka, can you translate it into English for me so I can make sure we're talking about the same thing?
Next, then compare the effect of education.
Excuse me. Rather than read the English, can you tell me what this one says? So I want to make sure that it's the same.
Exactly the same, isn't it? No? The same with the...
Yes. Yes.
Next then, I said, relating to education.
Okay, good. It's the same. It's the same. Okay. So now I'm going to just work with my sentence. Next, then, he says, of course, what a strange way to begin a book. Next, that's because, as I say, Plato didn't begin just book 7. Plato was writing continuously. So next, let's compare the effect of education which is the specialty of you two, among others. This most important story in this entire dialogue is about education. And since if I'm correct, that it condenses everything in this entire dialogue into one story, this whole dialogue is about education. That is the subject. But we're going to compare the effect of education and the lack of it. In English, we would say ignorance. What would you say in Japanese for ignorance? Okay. So education versus ignorance. This is a story about the difference between those two things. Or knowledge. What would you say for knowledge?
知識
Okay? And then education is that which gives you knowledge. It takes you out of ignorance into knowledge. So education is, it's really ignorance versus knowledge. Education is what moves you from one to the other. So, let's compare the effect of education, that or lack of it, on our nature. So it's the effect on our nature. This is our nature, human nature. He's saying there's this thing, education. This story is going to teach us about the effect of education on our nature. Let's just finish the sentence, at least in English. To an experience like this. So, the allegory. The story. This is what it's about. Then we're going to tell the story that's going to teach us about that. So there are two big things here. Education, our nature. Now, I don't know the words in Japanese, but in English, this nature, unless you put human nature in front of it, it sounds like you're talking about plants and whales going out into the forest. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about our character. The best word in English for this is the soul. What is it in Japanese?
魂
So, what is this whole dialogue about? If I'm right that this story tells you what it's about education and the soul. And it's going to tell you what it is to get an education, but in order to do that, you have to understand what the soul is, because if education takes you from ignorance to knowledge, well, who are you? What is the soul that is going to get educated? And this generates all kinds of other questions. Well, what is knowledge? One of the most important questions in the entire dialogue, but also one of the most difficult, so we won't get to it till later. Are there any questions about then what the story is about?
まあそんな難しいこと言っても分かりました。通訳いらない。
So I'll tell the story and we'll talk about it, but it's very important, I think, just from the beginning to see what it is that all of this is about. All of this is about what is in education, but more fundamentally, who are you? Because you need to know who you are first so that you can understand what it is that you don't know, and then you can get a glimpse of what this would be, and that's what education will be. So I'll periodically ask you, do you have any questions? But I'm always happy to be interrupted. I could be in the middle of saying something, if you just shoot up your hand and say, wait, no, explain this, or I don't believe that, that's crazy, you can't mean that, etc., etc. By all means, always interrupt. I'd much rather have a dialogue. Which is, as you've seen, if you've read this at all, that's what it is. It's a discussion and a dialogue. That's how Plato thought teaching works. Which has a lot to do with the nature of our soul. I mean, you know what it's like to just hear somebody talk for 2 hours. You don't learn very much.
Can I ask something?
Of course.
I know like this, kind of collection of books, one of, like literature by Plato. There's thousands of literatures by him.
Yes.
And it's a stupid question, but when was it, written by Plato?
Sure.
Like there's Menon or like other
Yes.
titles.
Okay.
Like that, so yeah.
Okay, so we call them all the dialogues. You can see why we don't say the books of Plato now, because that's this word we use for chapters. The dialogues. And among the most famous are the Republic, which we're doing, which is, if you're going to read one thing by Plato, this is the one. But of course, there are many other dialogues. You mentioned the Meno, the Gorgias, the Symposium, roughly 30. So Plato is writing, he lives from 428 to, I can't remember his exact death date, but let's say 350 or so. I don't remember his precise death date. But he's living in the 5th century BC to the 4th century BC. Socrates is his teacher. Socrates lives, again, I don't know that, I think it's 479 to 399. So they overlap for 30 years, roughly, 29 years. And Socrates is the teacher of Plato. Now that wasn't your question, I know, but I gave you an opportunity to just give you some context. After Socrates dies in 399, Plato writes these, 30 of them. And the question you're asking, there's no answer. When I was taught in graduate school, 30 years ago, I was taught there's an order. That's wrong. The reason why I was taught that was, well, first of all, we do know that a dialogue called the Laws is his last dialogue. So we know that much. And the thought was, well, if that's his last, there are some other dialogues. I'll just throw out these names. These are some popular ones. The Apologia. If you've heard of one other dialogue by Plato, it might be the Apology. It's the dialogue about the trial of Socrates.
弁明だったりする弁明
Yes, it might have a different title. It's a very strange title, even in English. In English, this sounds like, oh, I'm so sorry. And if you read it, Socrates doesn't apologize for anything. He's very proud of what he's done. This is just a Greek word, apologia, which means defense. It's his defense speech in court. So it really should be called the defense, not the apology in English. But what is it in Japanese? What is the title?
弁明 yeah, it's a defense.
Defense, oh, there you go. So you're closer to the truth than we are. So these dialogues, I could list a number of others out just off the top of my head. Laches, that'll be enough for now. They have a certain character. They're simple. They are short. But above all, well, they're not actually simple. They seem simple. They're on one specific topic, and they end in something in Greek that's called aporia. That's pretty small. I'll write it bigger here. Aporia. That's not an English word. That's just a transliteration of the Greek word. In English, we have the word porous. Like your skin has pores. You go through, the sweat goes through the skin. So an aporia means there's no going through. It gets stuck. And these dialogues that I was taught falsely, that they were early dialogues, they are aporia in the sense that there's a question, what is piety? What is courage? I could give you some other titles, it doesn't matter. What is self-control? The virtues. And the dialogue ends with no answer, just confusion. The other person in the dialogue, usually the name in the title, Euthyphro in this case, he thinks he knows what piety is. Just to talk about that one for the moment. It's outside the courthouse. Socrates is standing outside the courthouse waiting for his trial, which I'll just say is, let's say it's at 11 o'clock in the morning. Well, there's a trial before that, 9 o'clock, Euthyphro's trial. So Socrates bumps into him outside the trial, and Euthyphro is prosecuting his father for impiety. Can you imagine taking your father into court and accusing him of impiety? This was shocking to the Greeks, as it would be shocking to most people. You don't bring your family members into court. The father had killed a slave, and the son, Euthyphro, thought that was impious, that was impious. So Socrates thinks, wow, you must really know what piety is if you are so confident that you will take your own father into court and charge him of that. So he asks Euthyphro, what is piety? And Euthyphro says confidently, I can't remember his definition, it's being loved by the gods or something like that. And then Socrates just presents problems until eventually it's shown Euthyphro doesn't have any idea what he's talking about. He might come up with some more definitions, but in the end, just confusion. And then it ends, aporia, no going through to the understanding, no going from ignorance to knowledge. All that happens in those dialogues is somebody is shown that they're ignorant. How do you think that makes them feel? If you're about to prosecute your dad for impiety, and then this guy shows you have no idea what piety is, how would you feel?
パイリってどういう
So first of all, you'd feel confused. This would be a good translation into English, confusion. So these are the dialogues of confusion. But if you're about to prosecute your dad for impiety and you've just been shown that you're confused about what piety is, how would you feel about the person who just did that to you? This will be very important for what we're about to talk about.
あの言葉アポリアね、まあ、知ってますよね、知らないかな、まあ、行き止まりっていうか出口なしというか、まあなんか議論があってで、まあ、それはどういうことかって聞いてで、まあ、知ってるつもりになってるわけですよこっちの人で、それいろいろ言うんやけど、まあ、いろいろ矛盾が出てきて結局よく分からなくなって解決不能みたいなね、まあ、そういう議論が、まあ、ソクラテスはよくやってたわけですよ。でまあこれはまあ本の、まあ、いっぱい本を残してるので、何やったかなこの順番通りに書いたわけじゃないみたいなこと言ってたかな。以前はなんかね初期とか中期とか後期とかなんか分け方があったんですよね。なんか最近は違うのかなそういうのがね。ということですよね。
I will answer your question eventually, the one about where does the Republic fit in the story. But right now we're going to talk about these dialogues. It's going to be important, and I need you to think about that question. How would you feel? So just as another example, crazy example. Imagine I came in here and Yoshi is an expert in Buddhism. And I asked him a few questions. I asked, what is Buddhism? And he said some things. And then I asked some questions and he was not able to answer, just basic questions. How would you feel? Especially in front of your students.
まあフラストレーション。
Yeah. We say that word in English, frustration. What it means is anger. It's the polite way of saying, I'm angry. So there's frustration, there's anger, and then there's rage. Ah! So people start getting frustrated, then they get angry, then they get enraged. And what do people do when they're enraged? So when they're frustrated, they clench their fists. When they're angry, they punch someone in the face. What do they do when they're enraged? Not always, but just think of it as the extreme case of that emotion.
Killing by yourself.
What's that?
Killing yourself.
Killing. Killing. Is that what you said? Killing. Exactly. You kill. So now, Socrates goes around Athens, finds people who think they're authorities on things. Euthyphro thinks he's an authority on piety. Laches, a great general, thinks he's an authority on courage, and so on. And Socrates asks him, oh, Laches, you're a great general. What is courage? 20 pages later, it's clear Laches has no idea what courage is. What do you think Laches wants to do to Socrates?
Punching Socrates.
Maybe punch him, maybe kill him. So all of these. So what do you think happens to Socrates? He spends 20 or 30 years, it seems, wandering around Athens, humiliating experts. So what do you think they finally decide to do with him? They kill him. This dialogue, the apology, is his defense in a trial where he is being accused by people whom he humiliated. And they don't accuse him of, you humiliated us, therefore you should die. No, you were impious. What would this be? Irreligious, bad. two charges, that he's impious and that he's a corrupter. A corrupter of the youth. What is someone who makes the youth better? What do you call that?
Like,
Pardon?
could you say that again?
If I come all the way from America and you're young and I make you better by helping you to understand this book, for example, what would you call me?
Great teacher.
Teacher.
Yeah.
Good teacher or just a teacher. But if I come all the way from America and I pretend to teach you this book, but in fact I make you bad people, that's a corrupter. I don't give you knowledge. A teacher gives you knowledge. A corrupter makes you worse off. So maybe makes you ignorant, makes you vicious, makes you unjust, makes you impious, and so on. So those people whom he humiliated, they took him to court and they didn't say, you confused us. Because that would be to admit that they don't know anything. Instead, they took him to court and said, you're a corrupter. You've gone around and taken the youth and made them confused, and as a result, they're becoming bad. So you're not a teacher. You keep people in ignorance. You're giving bad education. Many of the dialogues are implicitly just about education. What is the good type? What is the bad type? Okay, now to your question. These dialogues you mentioned the Meno. Along the way I mentioned another one, Charmides. Don't worry about this. These were formerly called early. Early. And then the Republic, along with the Symposium, Timaeus, doesn't matter, were called middle. And then the Laws and others, I'll just give you some of the titles, Parmenides, etc., these were called late. And that's because there's a different style. These are aporia. These, like what we'll read in this course, they're not aporia. They tell you the answers. Now, he doesn't just come out and say, I'm going to tell you what it is. There's a dialogue, and there's a lot of confusion, but they go through the confusion, and they go through to knowledge. And then these dialogues are very complicated, and they're a mix of this. So it seems to scholars in the 19th century, when they started asking that question, it seemed that this was the young Plato, and what he was doing was he was just recording, where is it? He was just recording what his teacher did. Then he became a man, and he had his own views, and then he told you what his views were. In the style of that, but adding the views. But then as he became an old man, he realized, well, I thought I knew, but I don't actually know, and things got really complicated. Now, I spoke too strongly. I spoke as if that's absolutely false. I can't tell you why, I can't prove to you that it's false. I don't believe it. I was taught it as if it was absolutely true. But I will tell you what I think. And I think this is what most scholars think. Now, that there isn't much evidence for this chronology, except one fact, that there are these different styles. But that doesn't prove anything. Because after all, Plato could have been a great enough author to write in different styles at the same time of his life. Now, why would he have done that? Here's what I think is the best hypothesis for why he did that. For students who are starting out in philosophy, he writes this way. For students who are at the middle of their career, he writes this way. And for students who are mature, he writes this way. So if you're starting to study Plato, I don't recommend, I discourage you from going and reading these dialogues. They'll just be confusing and boring. That's the way they were to me when I started. We're going to read one of these. I think these are great dialogues, so I'm not saying there's something wrong with starting here, but this is a great place to start. I only had 4 weeks, I could only choose one, so this is what we're doing, and this is about education, so it made the most sense. But his goals, his pedagogical goals, if I'm correct, and this isn't just me, this is, most scholars think this now. The pedagogical goals here are take students who think they know and show them that everything they think they know has a problem. Now, if you came in thinking you know what education is, and I said, what is education? And you gave me an answer, and then I showed a problem with that, you might give me another thought. If we just kept doing that, and every time you gave me a thought of what education was, I was able to show to you that's not what education is, you would either get really angry at me and want to kill me. Plato doesn't think that young people do this. Young people are different from old people. Old people have had these views for a long time, and they've established a reputation and a career and prestige based on the idea that they know. So they respond with anger. But young people are different. And some old people are too. Wise old people are like this too. But young people can be like this more often. If I show you that you don't know what education is, if you don't get enraged, what would be a reasonable reaction?
Can I ask some question? Or like, could you tell me about it?
Exactly. You have a greater desire to learn. Before, you had no desire to learn because you thought you knew. You were ignorant, but you thought you had knowledge. But when you're ignorant and you think you have knowledge, there's no motivation for education. The motivation for education comes from, number one, ignorance, but number two, knowing that you're ignorant. Because when you know that you're ignorant, then you think, I need to learn. I'm going to find a teacher who will give me an education. And just to anticipate where we're going, very important which kind of teacher you choose. Very hard to choose a teacher. Why? I mean, I'll ask you, and then I'll give you the answer if it doesn't come to you. But when you're ignorant, and you recognize that you're ignorant, you think, I need a teacher. What's the problem? If there are, 2 teachers to choose from, and you can only choose one, what's the problem?
ちょっと途切れてからこのテキスト前の世紀だから前の世紀の学者たちがこういうふうに分けて今はだからいつかなんかプラトンで違うスタイルで同時に書いてないかみたいなこと言ってたかな。でこれだから昔はねこれ初期の著作上の方ですよねメノンとかありますけどでこれアポリアに行き着くでこの国家とかね共演ですよねシンポジウムそれからテマイオスとかでこれはなんかいろいろ議論は複雑なんだけどもなんか結論に行くみたいな言ってましたで最後のこの法律とかねパルメニですか違うわ
Laws.
とか、この辺りなんかもっとなんかややこしい作品だみたいな、同時にそれを変えたいないかっていう話でしたかね、はい、あとその後何言ってたそれはいいかそこは、教育に向かうなんか動機みたいなこと言ってた無知の知みたいなの言ってましたよねだから無知だからというのは、無知を知らないとで無知の知ってソクラテスの有名なあれですねこう議論していって相手が知らないということに気づかせるみたいなね。
Okay, so want to make sure.
Yes. Okay.
These are all written like around the same period, or just like
We don't know. The best answer would be we don't know.
わからないと。
And there are 2 explanations you can give for the variety of styles. One is he started when he was a young man and he had a certain style, and then he grew up and matured and he wrote in a different style, and that would be early, middle, late.
okay, makes sense.
Yeah. The other explanation, let's see if what's the other explanation, the one that I favor, just to make sure that it got through.
Wait.
So this is the chronological explanation, the developmental explanation. And I spoke too strong at first when I said, that's false. It's possible. But there's another possibility. And from my experience with Plato, I think this is true. because I have some familiarity with how he educates. And he educates in a different way based on where the student is. And this is one of my problems coming into this classroom is I don't know anybody. I want to educate you, but I need to know you in order to know what to say to you. I'll say something different to Hiroka, who studied a lot of philosophy, than to somebody who's maybe experiencing philosophy for the first time. I'm not sure. I guess you heard Plato's Cave, so I would do it differently. That's one of the challenges. So there's the chronological explanation. The other explanation is the pedagogical explanation.
まあ、日本ではだから伝統的にはこの若い頃はソクラテスの影響が強くて、まあ、割とソクラテスを忠実に描いてるんじゃないかと言われてて、で、まあ、中期以降はね独自の思想がこうできてきたので、まあ、ソクラテスの口を借りて言ってるっていうかな、主人公は必ずソクラテスなんですよ、全ての作品で。でもそれは必ずしもリアルなソクラテスじゃなくて、まあ、プラトンそのものだったりするみたいな。でそれはまあ中期以降だという説明がまああったけど、まあ、今の先生の説明でいくと、まあ、その教育的な観点で、まあ、いろんな書き方したんじゃないかみたいなこと、まあ、それがよくわからないという話なんですけど、
So I will
あとまあそのまあもうプラトンって40歳ぐらいでアカデミアという学校を作ったんですよ。でそこからね多分何十年もこの学校経営みたいなのにしてってそれは当時としては非常に珍しいギリシャ全土にですねなんか知れ渡るような、まあ、学校になったということなんですね。でそこに来るのはまあ大人というかな、まあ、子供が来てるわけじゃなくて若者以上の多分大人で、まあ、皆さん哲学を学んでいたみたいな、数学をしたりとかですねなんか割と高度な研究を行っていたということなんですよね。はい。
So on the fly, this other interpretation is that it's pedagogical, and these are written for new students. These are written for intermediate students. These are written for advanced students. These are written for students who don't yet know. These are written for students who have some understanding, and then these are written for students who are much farther along the way. So the question I put at the end, before the translation, was, if you're a new student of anything, philosophy, fisheries, whatever, and you recognize I'm ignorant, there's knowledge out there, I want that knowledge, I need to find a teacher who will give me that knowledge. The problem is, different teachers propose themselves. So imagine that Yoshi and I are both teachers, and you can only choose one of us, but you don't know anything. What's the problem?
違いかわからない。I don't know which is better.
Yes. In order to choose which is the better teacher, you'd have to know about what it is we teach. You'd have to look at Yoshi and says, well, he has this amount of knowledge, and Dr. Miller has this amount of knowledge, and I'm going with Yoshi because he has more knowledge about it. But you don't have that ability to assess because you're ignorant. You don't have the knowledge. This is the paradox of education. That you need a teacher, but when you need a teacher, you can't decide who's the good teacher. There is a lot of faith in education, a lot of trust. So, since as a student, you can't decide rationally who's the best teacher, what do you rely on to make the choice for you?
Like inquiry or paradox.
Maybe, but did you come into this classroom because you did an inquiry and you went through the paradoxes? You don't know who I am. I'm the stranger from a strange country, and yet you've come and you're going to sit here for at least 3 hours, maybe the whole month. You're implicitly assuming I'm a teacher and not a fraud. Why? Why do you trust me? Because I'm wearing a tie? No. Frauds wear ties. So do real teachers, but you can't use that to distinguish. So why are you trusting? What are you actually trusting?
Your name of professional, like you're a professor,
Okay.
he's a professor,
Yes.
I'm a student.
Yes. You're trusting Doshisha University. And Doshisha, through Yoshi, has put me in this place, and because you trust all of them, you're going to kind of trust me for a while. Of course, you should be thinking, I don't know, did they make a mistake? Is he trustworthy? But you're at least confident enough to sit here for 3 hours and check it out. So education requires a lot of trust, always. It's just a question of whom you trust. You trust Doshisha. Maybe you trust Yoshi because he's here as my friend and kind of vouches for me. But this story that I'm about to tell you, this allegory of the cave, is about trust and misplaced trust. Because after all, why do you trust Doshisha? Did you scrutinize all of the universities and decide this is the most trustworthy one? The others are not as trustworthy. I'm going to the one where there's true knowledge.
If I can put my thoughts like sincerely, like on my word, but I feel like I trust, like a professors, like superiority in the academic context, but there's the kind of like movements like for set of students to go outside of those university and like find a connection to the other professors in other universities, like in Ritsumeikan or the Kyoto University. So like we have kind of freedom to move like based on like the trust that we have.
Okay.
Yeah. Talking about that. Your question, yeah.
Well, in America it's similar. So I'll speak about America and then you can tell me whether this is true in Japan. In America, yes, you go to a certain university but then you realize, hey, there are other professors at other universities and you buy their books and read them. You might take an online course and so on. But even there, you're trusting the university system. So again, this may be very specific to America. You can tell me. I doubt it. I think it's probably true for you too. But in America, there is a crisis right now in the universities because the young generation, people in their teens and 20s, are looking at the universities and thinking, that's kind of fake. A lot of what they say, those professors, is fake. They have their degrees, they're experts in the things that they say, but there were experts in astrology too. And astrology, I hope I don't offend anybody, is fake. There were experts in the 19th century, there was the study of phrenology, which is studying the bumps on the head in order to learn the science of character. There were professors of phrenology, but it was fake. And so there's a widespread sentiment among the youth in America that the system is fake. One reason they're feeling that is because the internet has exploded in the last 25 years, and you can go to YouTube and realize, hey, the professors are saying this, but people on YouTube are saying this, and they've got some pretty good arguments. And these are just regular people. They're not relying on their degrees and prestige. They've earned their voice by proposing facts. Now, I'm not saying that they're right and the university professor is wrong, but imagine being a young person in that situation. Why should I trust the university system when there's this whole free education on YouTube or on Twitter? Where, frankly, I'll say, I've learned as much from online as I have in the universities. And I've experienced a lot of fakeness in the universities, and it's being corrected by the online world. But this is just to dramatize the question. If I'm a young person, if I'm 18, and I recognize I'm ignorant, I want to learn. What's the paradox? If you have a choice, I can go to university, I can work a job, and in the evening watch YouTube. Just apply that paradox I mentioned earlier. Again, so I can make sure that you understood me. What's the paradox? If you're a young person who recognizes you're ignorant and you're choosing an education,
you have to be ignorant. At the same time, you have to be knowledgeable.
Exactly. Exactly. To know that the university system is where the truth is, and that the online world is all a bunch of fake grifters, as we call them, just making money from sensational, provocative claims. I would already have to know. And you can just flip it around. It could be the other way around. I have to trust. And I throw my money and my time into one thing, let's say the university system, or into the online world. And it's not always that you have to choose one or the other, but we dramatize this choice because this is what this book is about. This dialogue is about the trust that we have in educators that will bring us from ignorance to knowledge. So I'll take any more questions and then I'll tell you the story so that we can start where I imagine we started. And by the way, I like that we can get derailed and do whatever you like. But before I go into the story, are there any questions? Or maybe Yoshi wants to summarize where I am. No pressure.
ちょっと田村君のそれ要約する何を一連の議論ですか。一言。
さっきのいわゆる日本語でいうメノンのパラドックスってやつ、教育のパラドックスという話で、例えば現在でもその大学の機関、教育機関でもその、なぜ大学教員が、その信頼を持っているか、なぜ大学教員を我々学生は頼ろうとするのかっていうので、現在アメリカではもうそれこそ YouTube とかそのオンラインのその学びの形態が出てきて、だんだんそのここのバランスもアンバランスなものになっているっていうので、
教育そのものはなくならないかもわからないけど、学校システムはよくわからないね。大きく変わるだろうというのは確か、なくなる可能性もあるね。
Yeah, but like, yeah, talking about like ignorance and have to know about like something to learn in the upcoming days.
Yes.
At the same time, I feel like logically speaking, it's correct. It's a paradox. I can say that, but I feel like we are learning like based on our curiosity. Like we're not learning like logically. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, oh, wow, you're so great. It's like your talents, from my perspective, what we kind of, it's kind of, you know, like a formula in front of me on the nature, in the environment. Well, it's so beautiful. I want to learn. I feel like we're moving forward, learning, like based on our kind of judgments of beauty, like like Himalayan concept, you know.
What was the last sentence?
Like
Beauty and then
judgments of beauty.
judgments.
Yeah.
Okay. I agree with you 100%. And I want you to see that.
Aesthetic judgments.
Oh, aesthetic. That was the word that I missed. That's fancy English. It's true. That's fancy English, but I want you to see one word, at least in English, and then we'll translate it into Japanese, that condenses this. So if you find a woman beautiful, you make an aesthetic judgment of beauty. Let's say you're in a bar and you see her across, you make an aesthetic judgment of beauty. What do you experience? One word. You could say the Japanese word and you could translate it, but I want you to see how visceral this is. What's that?
Resources.
What was the word?
What did you say?
Oh,
yeah, resources.
I said visceral, but I don't want to give away the answer. What do you experience when you see the beautiful woman or you see the beautiful man or whatever? One word.
Exclamation.
I'll make it easier. When you go to a restaurant, we went to a restaurant the other night, and one of the things I love about Japanese food and Japanese restaurants is there's a lot of attention to the aesthetics, the way the food looks. In very good restaurants in America, you get this, but Americans have a problem of just give me the food. I don't care how it looks, I just want to eat it. I mean, it can look gross sometimes, like a burger, you know, with sloppy bacon and cheese and so on. It can look disgusting. It can taste great, but I like it when it looks good. One reason why I like Japanese restaurants. And I'm trying to make the question about the woman in the bar easier for you to answer with no embarrassment. When you see a beautiful meal and you make an aesthetic judgment, that's a beautiful meal. What do you experience? One word.
Desire.
Desire, that's it. That's all I'm looking for. There's an English word, love. There's a Greek word, eros. That's the word that Plato has in mind. There's an entire dialogue, if you want to read more of Plato, Symposium, which is about love or eros. But this story, you've really hit the nail on the head. It's about education and its effect or lack of it on our soul. And Plato has an answer for what our soul is. We're going to spend a whole day or two talking about the soul when we get to book 4, but I can anticipate his answer for you. The soul is one word. The soul is eros. The soul is desire. And so what he said was very Platonic, that when we want an education, we recognize what we're ignorant of. It's our desire for knowledge that's driving us forward. It's our curiosity. That's an erotic relationship with the world. We want. And just like in a bar, when you see two beautiful women, you don't think this is paradoxical. I don't know what true beauty is, so how can I make a judgment about which one I want to buy a drink for? You go with your instinct, you go with your eros. Same in education. So when it comes to two teachers, Plato thinks there's an erotic relationship with the teacher. You're just simply attracted to one teacher and not the other. Something in you is drawing you to one teacher. And as often as course, I'll try to teach you Plato, but every once in a while, probably very often, I'll say, and I think he's right. Because when I look back on my education, it was a powerful drive to have what certain teachers had. I saw them and I wanted to be like that. They had something and I wanted that. And I wanted them in a way. So let's do the story. And you'll see where that comes into the story. Well, he asks us to imagine, very important, we'll see later on. Just imagine the following situation. There are people deep down in a cave. And they're shackled there. They're imprisoned. How long have they been there, if you read this, or if you recall it? Or again, this isn't a test. I just want to sense your familiarity. How long have they been there, these strange people at the bottom of the cave? Since childhood. This is the wall of the cave. And they're stuck in these chairs, and their heads are, I mean, of course, this is not practical. You have to just imagine. Their heads are stuck. They can only look forward. And they've been in that situation since childhood. So before we go any farther, what does that evoke for you? What do you think about that? What comes to mind? I have a hard time asking the question without giving you the answer. I mean, obviously, it's painful, something's wrong with this. I'm not looking for moral, ethical judgments. I'm asking you to imagine their situation from their point of view.
Slave.
So they're slaves.
これは
But do they think that they're slaves?
まあ、洞窟の比喩の話に今戻ってるので生まれた時から洞窟にいて頭の向きが固定されてるんですよね。奥の方に外じゃなくて奥の方に向きが固定されてる状態、まあ、それどう思いますかって言ってなんか
Let me put it this way. Okay, so this is the cave. This is outside the cave. Now, a lake, tree, the sun. If they were out here, and they're looking at the tree, for example, what could they get when it comes to trees? Very abstract question. There are a lot of trees. If this person wanders around and studies the trees, what could she get when it comes to trees? Very abstract question. I'm not asking, could she get apples, could she get oranges? I mean, when it comes to education, if these are real trees, and she goes around and studies them, what does she have the opportunity to get?
She can touch the tree,
Yes?
get the taste of it.
Yes? She can touch it, she can taste it, she can look at it, she can smell it. Absolutely correct. But what would be the next thing that she could get from doing a lot of looking and a lot of tasting and a lot of smelling and a lot of listening? What could she get?
What is a tree is
What- What is a tree?
tree is なんていう木が何であるか
The nature of the tree.
The nature of a tree, exactly. So these are, tree 1, tree 2, tree 3, and she's using all of her senses to study these trees. But if she does it enough, we have a word for this in English, and I'm sure you have direct equivalent, science. This is an English word from a Latin word, scientia, which is just from the Latin verb scio, which means to know. Science is just how you get knowledge. It's a certain understanding of how you get knowledge. So she put it very, I was looking for the answer. She could get knowledge of what it is to be a tree. Or as you put it so well, the nature of a tree. Did I understand you correctly? Okay. So knowledge is possible here. But I only brought that up, that's looking ahead. I only brought that up to focus your minds on what I'm asking you here. Here are these people, they've been here since childhood. I'll put it simply, can they get knowledge of trees?
No.
No. They have no experience of trees. The trees are out in the world. They're at the bottom of a cave. And they've been there since childhood. So when it comes at least to trees, these people are ignorant. And ignorance is gnosis. You may have heard of this. This is Greek for knowledge. So in English, at any rate, ignorance just means not knowledge. Knowledge is possible here, knowledge is not possible here. These people are in a state of ignorance. Imagine there's a wall here. And there's a fire behind the wall. And people are parading objects behind this wall. Well, the light is going to shine on the object. These are models in the English. These are, I'm going to call them puppeteers. What would the Japanese be for puppeteer? Yeah? Okay. So these are the puppeteers. Someone called these the slaves. I'm going to call them for now just prisoners. These are their puppeteers or their masters, if we use the slave language. And these masters are in control. Clearly, they're free. They're not imprisoned.
人形使い
Puppeteer. Okay. But we can also call them masters if we're going to call these people slaves. That's true too. They designed this situation with something specific in mind. The reason they put the fire here is the fire is going to cast shadows of the models onto the wall. So these are shadows or images. What would the English be? Or sorry, the Japanese?
影がこう火に照らされた影が壁に映っている状態。
Okay. Let's just do a quick review of Japanese words. So you just said shadows. What would be the word for prisoners?
囚人、
Okay. Ignorance.
無知、
Puppeteers.
操り人形師、
Okay. Models.
まあモデルですよね。
なんか元になるなんかが、
うん
こう光に照らす元がそれが向こうに映る、こういろんなものがある。
Okay. And then fire.
で火が。
Okay. Is the story clear?
ここで
Okay.
明らかになりましたね。
Now, I can ask the question I asked earlier that was way too abstract. I wanted you to put yourself in this position. You've been here since childhood. You are ignorant. We're going to say of trees, but it could be anything. You're ignorant of trees. But do you know that you're ignorant? If these people are projecting images or shadows of trees, if one of them were to turn to the other, well, not turn, but speak, what is a tree? So if this is person A and this is person B, and B says to A, what is a tree? Would A say, I don't know. I've never been out in the world. I don't know what it is to be a tree. I don't know the nature of a tree. Would that happen?
The shadow
Yes.
is true.
That's right. Yes. When B says to A, what is a tree? A just points. That's a tree. So A is ignorant of trees because this is how you get knowledge of trees. A is ignorant of trees. But does A know that A is ignorant of trees? No. What does A think A has about trees?
On the cave, like on the wall.
Yeah, but one word. So I'll repeat. This is where you get knowledge of trees. A is ignorant of trees because she's never been outside the cave. She doesn't know that she's ignorant. What does she think she has? Because B asks, what is a tree? And A will say, oh, it's got a stalk, it's got leaves, there are elm trees and maple trees and blah, blah, blah. She could be, you know, a botanist. I don't know what it is in Japanese. Someone who studies plants. Or trees even in particular. Maybe there's no word. All I'm trying to say is A could think of herself as an expert in trees. Would she be an expert in trees? No, she doesn't know anything about trees. She's never even seen one. But could B know that A was a fraud? What's the word for fraud?
なんか詐欺師的な。
Could B turn to A and say, you and your degree in botany, that's absurd. You've never even seen a real tree. You've been to university and you got your degree in trees, but you don't know anything because you've never been outside the cave. Could that happen? No. Why not? We're thinking here about B talking to A. Why couldn't B say that? Maybe a translation would be good. So I'll repeat it one more time. I'll give them names. A and B is just too abstract. So Alice and John. Alice is ignorant of trees because never been outside the cave. That's where you get knowledge.
あれツバキのことは全然知らない。外に出たことがないから。
Okay. Does Alice know that she's ignorant of trees?
アリスは自分が木のことを知らない無知であるっていうことを知ってるでしょうか。
She doesn't know about it.
She doesn't know about trees. Does she know that she's ignorant?
自分が無知だっていうのは知ってますか？
No. Why not?
なんでですか？
知らない時と知らないわけやから
影しか見て
知らない時と知らない
She just saw the shadow
That's all
of
she's
the
seen.
shadow of the trees.
Yes.
So
In order to know that they're merely shadows,
それはもう鏡に映ったこう影みたいな。
what would she have to have seen?
Real tree.
Real tree. But she's never seen the real tree. So she's ignorant, but she doesn't know that she's ignorant. She thinks she has, she's got a degree in botany from the best university in Japan.
日本で一番いい大学の
She thinks she has
学位を持ってるんだ。
Wait, I'm actually confused.
So let me just put the word. She
Yeah.
thinks she has knowledge, but it's not real knowledge because she's ignorant. So we have a convention in English. We put quotation marks to say, oh, knowledge. Knowledge. You do this? Do you do anything like that in Japanese? No. Okay. So when I put quotation marks, sometimes it'll be because I'll write a passage from the book.
いわゆる中
Yeah.
やねいわゆる
But when I do this, it means it's fake. That's fraudulent. That's an imposter, and so on. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So she doesn't know about the fact she is ignorant.
Exactly. Because the only way she could know is if she'd been outside and she got knowledge, and then she looked back at what she had believed and realized, I didn't know. Because now I know what knowing is.
But okay. But I feel like she does already know about the fact she never went outside. No,
No, she doesn't.
she doesn't.
Say more, and I'll tell you why not.
Yeah, if that's the case, she doesn't know about the fact she is ignorant, and what she's looking at right now is the mock tree.
That's right. So is this a real tree? No, it's a shadow or an image. But when she looks at it, and she studies it, and she gets her degree in trees, does she say, I have a degree in shadow trees? No. What does she say? I have a degree in?
We might be to be more specific, she does know about tree.
She does or she doesn't?
She does. She knows about the tree.
Well, she doesn't because she's never seen a tree. She has no experience of trees.
Yeah, if I can understand correctly.
In a what?
If I can understand correctly.
Yes.
She knows about the tree from her perspective.
Yeah. But is it a real tree?
From our perspective, from the
Yeah.
reader.
I'm asking from our perspective.
Yeah.
We are the knowers. We are the gods who see this situation.
Yeah.
And let's just speak as gods.
Okay, yeah.
Does she know it? Does she know trees?
She doesn't
No.
know. Yeah.
She's ignorant, but she thinks she knows. And the reason she thinks she knows is she has a degree in botany. And she's looked at all kinds of shadows of trees. And that's what you do when you get a degree, is you look at lots of shadows and you see the patterns and you can answer tests and you get good grades and you have a dissertation, you become a professor, etc., etc. But it's all fake. Because it's based on fake trees, shadow trees. But this is the most important thing. When you ask her, what is your degree in? Why can't she say fake trees? Why must she say trees, even though they're fake trees? Simple answer.
She never seen.
She's never seen. She's been here since childhood. This is, and here's what I think you were saying earlier. I didn't mean to shoot it down, but we need the God's perspective before we adopt this perspective. To her, this is reality. She has quote-unquote knowledge about quote-unquote reality. But it's all shadows and fakeness. It's not real. Does anyone believe in Santa Claus? I mean, this is not a good reference, because do people even celebrate? No, there's no celebration of Christmas here, is there? Very important figure in American culture, Santa Claus. You know who this is? Okay.
Santa Claus.
Did you ever believe it? So it's probably a terrible analogy. Did you ever believe in Santa Claus? No.
When I was a child.
When you were? Oh, so they do this in Japan? Did parents talk to the kids about Santa Claus? Oh, okay, terrific. So, nobody believes in Santa Claus in this room. But how many believed in Santa Claus when they were 3 years old? Most. At least you're familiar with that. So there's not believing in Santa Claus, and there's believing in Santa Claus. And so, you know, when you're 30, you don't believe in Santa Claus, and when you're 3, you do. At least in America. I guess it happens over here. I want to talk about 3 phases in this story about Santa Claus. You know exactly what this is like because you're in it right now. You can kind of remember this. And then there's this middle phase. Now in America this happens when you're 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, where if you're one of these people who believed in Santa Claus, you start thinking, doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, how does he get around the world in one night? Or why do his notes have the same handwriting as my parents' handwriting? Or he's really fat, how does he get down the chimney? Etc., etc. This is the phase of doubt. And when we don't believe in Santa Claus, as we are now, we can think back to that. And we think, oh, there was arguments for Santa Claus existing. My parents said so. I've always believed in him. Everybody acts like he exists. And then there's reasons against Santa Claus. These are Latin words, for and against. You can see it in the 6, 7, 8-year-old's mind and speech for a couple months. They kind of weigh it. Arguments for and against. This is what we do in philosophy all the time. Does God exist? Arguments for God's existence, arguments against God's existence. Once you're doing this, you don't believe in Santa Claus or in God. Why am I talking about Santa Claus? It's because this believing in Santa Claus, before doubt ever enters, is what it's like to be a prisoner in the cave. These people never say, maybe those are images, but I'm still going to believe. Or, somebody said they're images. Here are their reasons. But other people think it's reality. Here are their reasons. Once you start doubting this, your freedom has begun. Because the deepest slavery, the deepest imprisonment, is taking it all for granted. This is why I've told you this story, because this is just a fanciful story. It's very hard to imagine. Well, many of us, everyone in America at any rate, has at one point in your life believed in Santa Claus. And this point, since childhood, it's so hard to appreciate, but that's what Plato's talking about, first of all in the story, and then we'll talk about why it matters. But he's trying to get you to see, what would it be like to take as real an entirely fake world? And what he's saying, and what I'm trying to illustrate with this is, you don't take it as real by saying, I believe this is reality. That would be in this stage, where you think the pro outweighs the contra. Instead, it's so fundamental an experience of the world that whether it's real or not never enters your mind. You never say, that's a real tree. You just say, hey, that's a tree. So let's pause, because that's a crucial difference. So simple, but people don't often appreciate it to see what Plato's really saying. He's saying, we'll see, we, because this is a story about us. He says, they are like us. This is us. We experience something we call reality. Real books, real people, real values, real religions, real political institutions, real countries, etc., etc. And it's all fake. But we are at a stage where we don't say, well, it could be fake, it could be real, I'm going to believe this and that. No, we're in the midst of it all as if it's real, and we're so in the midst of it, we don't recognize that we're in the midst of it. So maybe somebody can summarize in Japanese, and then we could talk about it.
我々も彼らと一緒だ。
Oh, everyone understands? Everyone understands? Do you have any questions? It's a simple point, but it's so important. And I'll repeat why it's so important. What Plato is saying to you, and 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 to me, is you, now this is why your point about the God's perspective. I said we need the God's perspective first to see what he's saying. But that's what we do in academia. Let's take the university. That's how you get your degree. What does it say? What are we, But now this is going outside university and reading Plato as, this guy really, really is helping me, or maybe he's hurting me. He's trying to educate me at any rate. He's saying, that's you. So what he's saying to you is, there is a huge part of your life that is fake. But you don't even recognize that you can doubt it. It's so outside of your conscious awareness that to doubt it wouldn't even make sense. It makes sense to doubt Santa Claus. When you go to a 3-year-old and say, why do you believe in Santa Claus? They'll just look at you like,
Why not?
yeah, it's like, that would be like, do you believe that this world, do you believe that this is a book? What are you asking me? That doesn't make any sense. Do you believe that you eat food? Why are you asking that question? And when it comes to religion, if you ask somebody, do you believe in God? A truly religious person will not really understand the question. I mean, of course, if they're sophisticated, they'll know why you're asking it and so on. But it will be a belief so deep, it will be like this with this. Which I'm not saying, therefore, it's false. I'm just saying, we have beliefs that are so deep that they constitute the world we experience. They're not things in our world. They're the way the world gets built. It occurs to me one analogy. When you go to the theater, you see the actors on the stage. Those are individual things on the stage. But the theater itself is giving you that experience. When you're watching a great play or a great movie, you're in that world. You don't think, I'm in a theater watching a movie and these actors that'll ruin the experience. There's that moment in theater and cinema where you're absorbed in it. And if it's a horror movie, when the guy comes out with the axe, you get scared, which is crazy because you're just sitting in Kyoto in a theater and it's just pixels on the screen. Why would you get scared? Because you're in that world as if it's real. Plato's saying, you're in this world as if it's real, but it's fake. So are there any questions about that most fundamental point? While you're thinking, let me add at least a connection with what we talked about at the beginning, about education. Education is moving from ignorance to knowledge. That's gone now. In the cave, in the story, that would be going from here to here. So think about it as a story, and then we'll take our break, and we'll come back and we'll interpret it. But just as a story, what would it take for someone to get here? What's the first thing that would have to happen?
That was just the image.
That's right. This person, Alice, would have to think, not just that this is fake, but what would be the fundamental question? Not this is fake, that's close, but this might be fake. That would be the phase of doubt. Once you doubt, the illusion is shattered. Just like you're in a theater, you're watching a movie. If you think this might be a movie, well, you're not gonna, when the guy comes with the axe and you're thinking this might be a movie, then you're not gonna be scared. So first of all, doubt. Recognizing that those are shadows. Somehow getting unshackled and turning around. So I'm gonna draw an eyeball. Here we have the eyeballs all looking in this direction. But if you turn around, you started with this might be fake, you wrestle, somehow you get out, you turn around, it's clearly now fake. You're gonna see this as you go by. We'll talk about that. But think for a moment of this experience. When you're right here, if this were you, and then now you go from doubt to this, what will your feelings be?
That might be real tree. Like, yeah.
Well, you haven't gotten out yet. I'm just the first stage where you're looking and you turn around. What's the first emotion?
So bright.
So that would be an experience. Yes, you'd see the fire, but emotionally, confused. Confusion. Because you thought you knew, and now you realize, I'm ignorant. But I don't have knowledge. I thought I had it and I don't. I'm confused. Terrific. Let's go back. You're still here. How would you ever doubt this? If that's your reality, and you've been there since childhood and everybody else accepts it as reality, how would you ever doubt that? There are only two ways. Either you're just so smart, somehow you figure out that this doesn't make sense. Possible. Or, what's another way? And I haven't drawn it into the picture, so you can't see it in the picture. But just think, how else might Alice be freed? And we'll stop once you get this, because we're at our time. I'll sit for this one. Most important question. So maybe if somebody wants to translate the question or think more, I can ask it again.
でこう疑いっていうことを一つはすごく頭がよくってその人自身がちょっとこれおかしいと思うっていうことともう一つは何でしょうっていう質問だったんですけど
So there are two ways to escape. You either do it by yourself
もう
or
本人はだから強制されるとか The book says she was forced to
yes.
turn.
Yes. That's what I'm looking for. By whom? So we'll call somebody frees her.
Yes.
And now I'm doing what I said I wouldn't do, because after the break, I mean, we've told the story, we have a little bit more to say, but after the break, we'll talk about what does it mean? Because it's an allegory, everything represents something real. But I am now breaking the rule, and I'm saying, if somebody comes down into this cave and loosens the shackles for Alice, and grabs her and picks her up and turns her around, I'll call that person, just abstractly, a liberator. So here's Alice looking this way. Here's this person who has dragged her up here. But now I want you to interpret it. Alice was ignorant. Her ignorance was so deep that she thought she knew. That's what trapped her. In the end, that is the trap, thinking you know when you don't know. Because what does it kill? If you think you know, what don't you have? I'm looking to you because you used the word earlier. If you think you know, you have zero. If you think you know everything there is to know about trees, what don't you have when it comes to trees? Curiosity. Curiosity is the desire to do something. In this case, if you're ignorant about trees, and your ignorance is so deep that you think you know about trees, namely, I've got a degree in botany, I know everything there is to know about trees, this liberator would come and grabbing you and turning you around. What that would mean would be showing you that you're ignorant, showing you that the knowledge you have, the fake knowledge, the knowledge you think you have, is fake. So what is that person? What do we call that person in our lives? The person who shows you that you don't know.
Teacher.
The teacher. And now just before we break, what will the teacher, if it's a genuine teacher, make you experience? Just think, we've already got the elements. In the story, grabs you, turns you around. What do you experience? You said it earlier. Never mind the teacher, just what do you experience as you're looking?
Like she says, yeah, like confusion.
Confusion. So the teacher, the first thing the teacher will do to you is make you confused. Now, if you're driven by this love of beauty, this love of goodness that we'll talk about later, but this desire to know, you might be grateful. You might immediately recognize, I was ignorant and thought I knew, and so I was trapped. This teacher, by making me confused, is going to make me happy. So you might be grateful. It's possible. Plato thinks that's not what most people experience. What do you think most people experience when somebody comes along and makes you confused? Especially if you had a degree in botany and a job teaching about trees, and the confusion that the teacher has instilled in you is that you know nothing about trees, that it's all fake. What would the emotion be? Probably. So Yoshi, the expert in the room, if I came and grabbed you and turned you around and everything that you thought you knew about Buddhism was actually fake, it was all based on bad scholarship and so on, what would you feel?
もし来てあなたがこう知っている仏教とかそういうものっていうのは全部フェイクなんだって言われたらどういう気持ちがしますか
Especially if I did it in front of a crowd of your students.
こうやって生徒の前で
That's okay.
That's okay.
No, that's a Buddhism.
Yes, exactly.
That's a Buddhism.
He is the exception. So now imagine that you're a normal person. What do most people experience when they're shown to know nothing, especially about the thing that they're supposed to be an expert in?
出て 絶望
Despair?
Oh, well, despair. That's going even farther, yes. But I'm asking you to focus on the person who's doing it to you. The teacher, the one who is making you experience this deep confusion. And I'm dramatizing it by saying, and doing it in a public way where everybody is looking, and the people who pay you weekly for knowing about it are seeing that you don't know anything about it.
Angry?
Angry.
What do you say?
Yes. And the reason why I needed to get this in before the break is that I didn't want to lose what we talked about because of your question when we talked about the defense of Socrates and the early dialogues, etc., etc. This teacher is modeled on Socrates. Socrates comes to people and he asks them questions that instill doubt. The aporia, the not being able to understand, the no way through. And people get confused. And those early dialogues, confusion, confusion, confusion. And some of them, like Plato presumably, because he would have been somebody who heard Socrates and got confused, some of them, rare ones, think, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. I thought I knew, now I see I didn't know. Filled with curiosity and the desire for knowledge, I want to learn now. Some people are like that. Plato acknowledges that, but that's very rare. Most people, when they're shown by a Socrates figure that their religion has many problems that they never recognized before, their expertise is kind of fake, most people get angry. And so, among other things, what Plato is doing here is he's giving you a way to visualize what happened to Socrates. That the teacher will inspire a few to seek knowledge, but will have the effect on many that they'll want to kill him. So why don't we, that was my 90 minutes, so why don't we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and do some more of this. I was hoping we'd get this by the break, but this is the most important thing. Break, I say 10. That's what I thought we would. So we'll do 15. I'll say 15. We'll do 15 next time. So I have some more things to say about the cave before we start at the beginning of the dialogue. But before I do, are there any questions that occurred to you over the break?
Yeah, so it's like an ignorant person from our perspective, like we know about like what the tree is like
Yes.
by getting outside from the cave,
Yes.
going outside and then like getting a sunlight at the same time.
That's right.
But that's the way like the ignorant person Alice is gonna be free from the cave or from ignorance. But to be more specific, we cannot say like what the precise process like for Alice to become like not ignorant. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
That's what the dialogue's about.
Oh,
is
yeah.
What is the process?
mm,
Yeah. And I mean, this won't tell you the answer, but it will give you another clue. It's desire and love for wisdom. You see, wisdom or knowledge is about reality. Now again, this isn't like, oh, now I'm wise. It's not like I've told you what reality is, but we can agree that whatever wisdom is, it's going to be in touch with reality, whereas what these people have is not wisdom. It's quote-unquote wisdom, quote-unquote knowledge about quote-unquote reality. The love of wisdom, or the desire for wisdom, might be present in some of these people, but it's not fulfilled because they're not in touch with reality, so they don't have wisdom. This person, I say, remember, there are two types. One type, when given doubt by the teacher, gets angry and just wants to go back. This is like the person who believed in Santa Claus or believed in God will make this more realistic. And somebody comes along and says, well, there's this problem with the existence of God, evil. And to somebody who's never heard of this problem of evil, as we call it, this can be very upsetting. I've taught, theology, philosophical theology, and I have had Christians very serious. And when I teach the problem of evil, a standard problem in all religions, some of them get very, very upset because they've never heard of this problem before. I mean, they know evil exists, but they didn't realize if you believe God is good and God is all-powerful, how can you account for evil? And not to say that that refutes religion, but it instills a doubt. That person I'm thinking of right at the beginning of my career got very upset. Maybe not necessarily at me, but got very upset. But there's another type who thinks, you have come to me as a savior. I always felt it was fake, but I didn't have the words. And you've now helped me start to realize where I always wanted to go. So when I asked Yoshi that question, how would you feel? He was answering as somebody who loves wisdom, who wants that. And in Greek, this is philia, and Sophia. So love is in Greek is philia, and wisdom in Greek is Sophia, and so we have in Greek philosophia, or in English philosophy. So I haven't said anything to answer your question, but I've just given you the word that Plato will use. The process of how you go from here to here is now called philosophy, whatever that is. And then this dialogue is about, well, what is philosophy? And how can it take you from one place to another? But I love your questions for many reasons, but one of them is you asked one of the most important ones at the beginning was about curiosity and desire, that philosophy is rooted in desire. It's erotic. It's not an intellectual, the way, at least in America, we often think, an intellectual, problem-solving, answering all the objections. That's what philosophy, the discipline of philosophy is like in America. That's how I was trained and so on. And I always felt it was fake. And when I discovered Plato, I mean, I discovered it at the beginning, so in a way I was predisposed, but as I began to really understand him, I realized he is saying that the field of philosophy is fake, which is how I always felt. I was drawn to it, because there are fragments of wisdom in it, but they're all scattered and they're not put together in a way that can help anyone escape. Any other questions? I think I have just one more thing I want to say about the cave before we go back to the beginning of the dialogue, but I think it's a good time to just answer any questions you have that this has prompted. Because we're going to get into a lot of details about all kinds of topics. And I guess what I'm inviting you to do is just keep this always in your mind. Always filter it through this story. Because if you understand this story, you get what he's saying. And then what we'll do in the rest of the course, what you'll get from the rest of the dialogue, is just details to explain this. But just keep the basic picture in mind. So as such, it's very important that we get the basic picture. Yes?
日本語で言えばいいですよ。英語にしてもらいますけど、なんかすぐパッて英語を思い浮かばない。
Can I say something? Yeah. Can I say something as well? We understand like most people got angry if there's something like interrupting what we learned before, like you put the example like
Yes.
in Buddhism.
Yes.
But like, are we always gonna be like angry like when this happens? Like maybe someone's gonna be angry, but maybe someone's gonna be like having errors
Yes.
suddenly,
Yes.
straight away. Maybe. Do you have any thoughts about varieties
Yes.
of the reaction to what something interferes with your learning process that you had before.
Yes. Yes. So I think it's a spectrum, you know, and you've got sort of pure eros, pure philosophy. So just imagine like a saint, a sage, who's, 15, 16 and is encountering these ideas for the first time and is just rapturous with delight that this is what my soul has always yearned for and no anger whatsoever. And then this would be, the killer person who, the type who executed Socrates, who charged him and then succeeded in convicting him. I think very rare, also pretty rare. Most people are somewhere along this spectrum. So, as a teacher, I've never quite experienced that, I've never quite experienced that, as far as I know, but I've experienced almost everything in between. And also in my own philosophical development, I've experienced various phases. One phenomenon that I've noticed as a teacher that I try to remember is that I have had students who have been angry with me for the first month, for the first course, for several months. And then I get a letter 10 years later. I mean, this happened to me. I failed somebody, and then I got a letter 10 years later saying that was the best course I had in all of college.
Okay.
You're the only one who held me to reality.
Okay.
So I also think that even if anger is a normal reaction for everybody, some people can work through it, and it takes time, and different amounts of time for different people.
Yeah, like also like I popped up something like what I wanna ask was like how didactic it's gonna be created like for the people's reaction to the confusion, like because like it's not just about content, I guess,
Right.
I guess that's why there was the class like called didactic in Roman, like Middle Ages liberal arts in the church, yeah.
Yeah.
So like how important is it, talking about how you're gonna teach,
Yes.
how you're gonna put your words
Yes.
about the contents you're gonna
Yes.
teach.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I understand, but
Yeah.
if this answer I give you doesn't respond, then you ask it again.
You totally responded, yeah, but
Oh,
I
have
just
more to
wanna
say, yeah. So, Plato says, I can give you the line number because I think this again is one of the most important lines for our course in this Faculty of Education here. So this is, just give me a moment, I don't have this text marked.
今どういう質問したのかちょっと日本語で。
なんかその
Okay.
Can I translate to Japanese?
Oh, I'm going to tell you the line, then you can all
Ah,
just
yeah.
read the Japanese. Okay, so it is 518. 518B. B6. 2. 518D1.
B118B やね。
And here is how we must think about
Yes.
matters.
18.
そこらです。
So this would be good if you can make sure that Yoshi has the same line and then Yoshi can read.
の A の B の
B の
出てない。
それは
Doshisha.
ソクラテス
Line.
The sixth line?
ここで
What is six?
Oh, so mine has, you know, the B5, 6, 7, 8, C1, 2. It doesn't have the numbers except every 5, but yours might not. So you can just do B to D.
Mm.
B to D
The only reason I do B6 is because B starts in the middle of something, but that's okay.
多分103ページぐらい4のとこ100
そう新しいのだと多分ページがちょっと違う。
103ページの4って書いてあるのか103、
私の版だとそうです。でも多分こっちが持ってるのがちょっと版が違う。
鍵括弧のそれならって書いてる。
そんな違うと思ってね。
一方の魂に対してはとか。
全然違う。全然違う。
518の B
第7回。
以前より明るい輝きの髪を。
ああ、それだ。出てきました。
ここやね。こっちゃう。
あ、そっちです。
こっから次のページぐらい。
それなら。
これ辺やな。D のは。103ページやからね、違うから最後の行やでさ、103の最後の行。
この本だと114とか115の綺麗のところ4って書いてある。
違うの版で。
それは大変公平適切なお説ですね。お金を答え
なんで違うの。
それならと僕。
それなら、あ、それも。
新しいみたいな。最近買って
110何ページ
2008年に買った2008年の前のちょっと2008年で版が変わってるみたいな。
あれ見つけられましたか。見つけられました。
はいはい。
Yeah, you found the line, yeah.
Okay, so why don't you read it slowly in Japanese, and then I'll give a commentary based on what I'm reading. I'm not sure it will line up, but
It's true what you said, and we have to think like this, polite, blah blah blah, and but the education is
it's okay. You can just read it out loud in Japanese. Because it's a faithful translation, so I'll just talk based on what you're saying.
これそれならのとこで、
そうですねそれが
それなら
So that's the right line. Why don't you just read, for a minute in Japanese?
日本語でいいみたいですよ。
それならと僕は言った。もし以上に言われたことが真実であるならば、我々は目下問題にしている事柄について次のように考えなければならないことになる。当てます。
You can keep going. I don't know. It should be more.
すなわちそもそも教育というものはある人々が世に宣言しながら主張しているようなそんなものではないということだ。彼らの主張によれば魂の中に知識がないから自分たちが知識を中に入れてやるのだということだし、あたかも、盲人の目の中に視力を外から植え付けるかのような。まずですか。確かにそのような主張が行われていますねと彼は言った。ところがしかし今の我々の議論が示すところによればと僕は言った。一人一人の人間が持っているそのような真理を知るための機能と各人がそれによって、学び知るところの機関とは初めから魂の中に内在しているのであって、 ただそれをあたかも目を暗闇から、光明転向させるには身体の全体と一緒に転向させるのでなければ不可能であったように。
Okay. I don't know, wherever it's natural to stop. Is that an end of the speaker?
A bit small, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 Well, this is all to answer your question, and we can get into the details of it in a moment, but you asked me how much content is involved in teaching, or didactic is the word that you use.
Yeah, didactic.
Yes. So here's what I heard, and here's the answer that I'll give, and as I say, if it doesn't answer your question, you can just ask it again. But these people, the prisoners, are being given an education. But according to this custom that I'm going to use, this is a quote-unquote education. This isn't a real education, because everything is fake. And what Plato is saying is true education is not acquiring more and more information, which is what this education does. It just shows you images of trees, images of cars, images of whatever it is that you want to understand. True education is turning around, reorienting your soul. So remember how it begins, the effect of education or the lack of it on our nature or our soul. This is the answer to the question. What is education? It's not putting stuff into your soul. It's turning your soul around. Well, what does that mean? We need to read the rest of the dialogue to understand what does it mean to turn your soul around. But in the allegory, you can see what it means. You were looking at fake things. Now you're going to start moving towards looking at real things. And again, I'm not sure I understood your question, but the answer I have to offer to what I understood is that, in a way, it doesn't matter what the teacher says. The content is irrelevant, because this is content, putting stuff in the soul, showing more and more images. And as far as Plato's concerned, that's useless. All that matters is turning around. And if I could, in the manner of a Zen monk, just whack you on the head and then you would turn around, that would be education.
Yeah, what I asked was like how like basic skill for teachers to like teach something fluently,
Yes. Yes.
That's what I meant by
I see.
quote,
I see.
didactic.
So he never talks about that. So I'll have to imagine what he would say. I think he would say it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that the teacher is coming from here. In other words, the teacher knows reality. The teacher comes down to the student, and as I said at the beginning, as we say in America, meets the student where she is. In other words, isn't just going to speak about these things, because this person will have no idea what the teacher is saying if the teacher just talks about this. The teacher has to look at these things and say, have you noticed something about this?
Okay.
And that, in planting that doubt, that will loosen the fetters. I mean, we're blending the allegory and reality now. That will loosen the mind so that the mind or the soul can turn around.
Okay. It's like know how to teach is really oriented in the situation
Yes.
where the people or like this Alice is
Yes.
in.
Yes. So that's an essential component, but the most important component is the teacher has to be wise. So the most important thing, teacher is wise, teacher knows reality, so that when teacher goes down, teacher can say what it will take to reorient. But then the second component, which is coming out of now of our discussion, is the teacher has to know about Alice. And particularly the teacher has to know about Alice's soul, and thus what souls are like. I've given you the answer already, according to Plato, in ways that we'll see in Book 4. The soul is desire. It's the desire for goodness and beauty. And since he thinks everybody's got that, the teacher will implant doubts about this that will draw on the desire for beauty. mean, have you had this experience where you have a friend who likes bad music?
Bad music.
Bad music. And you, in the scenario, we're going to imagine you like good music, and we're simplifying. You like good music, and your friend likes bad music. You don't just go and say, you idiot, your music's bad. They're not going to learn anything from that. They're just going to get angry at you. But neither can you just play them good music, because they don't appreciate it yet. So first of all, you have to appreciate good music. You go and you meet them where they are, and I'm going to have to pick something that's bad. I don't want to offend anybody, but you tell me, what's bad music? Just give me an example of like really bad music.
Beatles music.
Okay. So let's assume the Beatles are bad. Let's say Bach is good and the Beatles are bad. The true teacher would love Bach, understand Bach. Wouldn't just come down to the Beatles fan and say, listen to some Bach, right? The Beatles fan is just going to think, that's great, I don't like that. The teacher will have to say, well, sure, the Beatles are kind of okay, but have you ever noticed you can't dance to them? There's like, the Rolling Stones have something that's just not in the Beatles. Somebody who likes the Beatles can appreciate that. So already now you put some doubt. So that you've loosened the attachment to the image. But you might say, hey, well, there is a kind of good thing in the Beatles sometimes, like, can you think of anything good in the Beatles? I mean, presumably there's something.
Yeah. Like a movements against societies. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
An idea comes to me. Do you know the song Eleanor Rigby? It's a cello song. Eleanor Rigby. It's got a cello in it, which is an instrument used in Bach. And you could say to the Beatles fan, I like it. I was just speaking personally. I like Eleanor Rigby, but it's not Bach. But if you like, to the Beatles fan, you like Eleanor Rigby, you like cello, listen to this. Here's a cello concerto. Whoa. So that's taking the desire they had that was kind of satisfied by Eleanor Rigby and saying, there's something so much better. So I guess, to simplify, education, Plato's saying, and I agree, it can't be just criticizing, and it can't be just, hey, look over here. It has to be a mix of criticism and look over here simultaneously. To detach from the images, but also to present something that will fulfill desire. Because we all want to fulfill our desires. If you just go to someone and say, this isn't fulfilling your desires, they're not going to change, because they need something. You have to give them something that will satisfy them.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, sure.
ちょっとまとめを。
僕の質問は、ティーチャーとかソクラテスみたいな人がどれだけいわゆる教育方法ってやつについて考えるべきかっていうのを聞いたんですけど、先生の回答によれば、僕が理解した限りではやっぱりなんていうか、ただ今生徒が持っている考えを批判するのだけではダメだし、彼ら生徒が学ぶべきものの良さを伝えるだけでもダメだし、そこはねやっぱりなんていうか教育的タクトっていうのがどういうワードが適切かわかんないんですけど、そこはやっぱりもうミックスというか教員なりソクラテスのもうそこは腕の見せ所が、そこはいわゆるソクラテスによる、観察、生徒とか、ピューポーとかに対する観察とか、彼らがどういう矛盾を持っているか、彼らがどういう知識を持っているかとか、そういう観察にも基づいているし、もちろんそこにはソクラテスが、事前に知識とかリアルトリー、現実の木を知っていなければならないし、そこにはいろんな要素がありますけどみたいな感じですかね。
ちょっとこの授業からちょっと離れますけど、去年我々が読んだ矢野先生の本はまさにこのことを書いて、ちょっと言葉を忘れたいので何か言ってたよね。その教育者のこと呼び方として。一旦外に出て戻ってくるみたいな話をして、もちろんソクラテスのモデルに書いてるから 同じといえば同じね。はい、まあいいです。はい。
He's now saying that last year they read the book wrote by
プロフェッサー
Professor Yano, who is a professor of University of Kyoto University, and he said that the same kind of thing in his book
Oh,
with Plato.
okay. Okay. Any other questions? There's one more thing I really want to say about the cave. So we'll talk more about it, but if you have a question or two.
まあでもこの考えはね、全体的にやっぱ仏教に近いところがあるわね。仏教ってやっぱ我々が見たり聞いたりしてる世界はやっぱり幻の夢を見てるような生活なので、まあそっから目を覚ましなさいと言ってて、プラトンはやっぱ仏教知ってたんやないかな。ちょっと話が飛躍しますけど。
knows about Buddhism.
Yes, I think so. Let's return to the question of the paradox of choosing the teacher and the faith. So, these people have faith that this is real, but they don't think, I have faith that this is real. It's the faith of believing in Santa Claus at 3 years old. So they are trusting and they are having faith, but it's not a conscious faith. Who are their educators? Who's giving them their knowledge? Now, it's not real knowledge, it's fake knowledge. But where's it coming from?
Where is it coming from?
Yes, who's giving it to them in the story?
Wait, real tree? You know.
Well, that would be real knowledge, but these people don't have real knowledge.
Mm.
They have fake knowledge about fake things. Trees, justice, love, you name it. Whatever it is they quote unquote know, it's fake, but they're getting these images from somewhere. They're educators who are, now these are fake educators, but who are they? What's the name for them in the story?
誰がこういうフェイクの情報を教えてるんでしょうか。どっからこのフェイクの情報
The puppeteers, exactly. The puppeteers are educators, but they're fake educators. They're not giving them real knowledge. That's the privilege of the real teacher, the liberator. They're giving them fake knowledge. So we have two models of education. One gives you images, one leads you to reality. But now there's a third. Because imagine that two people, this is a messy drawing, I know. I'll draw it. So this was Alice. This buried under here is the liberator. But let's, another tall person. Imagine two people give Alice doubts. And two people accompany her as she turns around. And both people show her the puppeteers. They're both educators, they're the same so far. But then one says, that's it. Namely, the point of education is to recognize everything's fake. But another one says, that's an important stage, but there's another stage, which is seeing that there are some realities.
What are you going to say? The two educators say.
Not both. So let's call this alpha and beta. These are just Greek characters. I've already used A and B. So alpha, let's say, is the liberator. Alpha says, do you see these fake educators? Now you see where your fake education was coming from and where your fake knowledge and the fake reality? Alice says, yes, I see, teacher. Then Alpha, the liberator, says, good. The next stage is we're going to bypass all of this and we're going to go to a place where there are realities. What will that word mean anything to Alice at that point? Realities? Because after all, she used that word, but it was about fake things. So she has no concept of reality, except it's just not that. So she has to trust Alpha when he says, there's a real place, and I'm going to take you there now. By contrast, Beta has given her the same instruction to a point, namely, hey, see, there are puppeteers, and they're creating this fake image, and I've freed you, etc., etc. But when Alpha talks about realities, that's just another trick. There is no such thing as the world outside. At that point, Alice has to choose to follow Alpha, and there's a lot of faith, because Alpha is saying, come with me to a world you've never seen, about which you have no idea, but it's real and it will make you happy. Versus Beta, who's saying, that's a trickster. He's leading you to something even worse than what the puppeteers did to you. You know, he's going to put you in a deeper part of the cave, where you're going to think you're in reality, etc., etc. Alice would have to choose. Is it a rational choice? Can she say, well, here are the list of good teachers, the good qualities in a teacher, and A has them, Alpha has them, and B doesn't, or vice versa? No. She doesn't know how to measure those two claims, because she's never been outside. So again, faith. There's an act of faith here, and then there's an act of faith if there were two types of education. Now, remember, there are three. There's the puppeteers, but then there are these two ways to see the puppeteers. We've already called Alpha the philosopher. Beta is going to be called the sophist. There's just a word. We'll talk about those people and what they offered when we get to them.
ソフィストっていうのはギリシャ時代の職業教師と言われている人ですね。
I'll give you a name. So the philosopher in this dialogue is Socrates, no surprise. The sophist is named Thrasymachus. And he is the major character in Book 1. If you read Book 1 for today, he occupies the second half of Book 1. And that's a debate between Socrates and Thrasymachus about what justice is. But what's really happening in that debate is there's a contest between two types of education. One type, which is saying, you can get outside this whole thing. And another type saying, you can become a puppeteer. Wouldn't you rather be a puppeteer than a slave? Wouldn't you rather be a master than a slave? And the only way to determine who's right is to know reality, if there is such a thing. And the only way you could investigate that is by following Alpha or Socrates and seeing, well, is he right? Is there such a thing? Plato will say in Book 7 later on, it'll take 50 years, but you'll get there if you've got the right nature, and very few people do. So it's not like you can think, well, I'll try Alpha for a while, and if that doesn't work, I'll go with Beta. You only have one life. So you either give Socrates his 50 years or you don't. That's where the faith comes in. Now, you mentioned a dialogue, the Meno, and that prompted me to think, well, let's talk for 10 or 15 minutes about that dialogue, because it will help in thinking about this choice, and it will connect up with what you introduced with desire. So, I have lost my parapluie. Can anyone find it for me?
ちょっとこう訳した方がいいかな。対話についての話をするとですね、メノン
Don't look it up.
メノンはメノン、日本語ではメノン、メノンというもの
Yeah.
が薄っぺらいもの。
So I'm telling you about the Meno dialogue, and I'm going to tell it to you in terms that I hope will work. So I've lost this. Can anyone help me find it? Don't look it up. That'll ruin the exercise. I had to give you a French word because I figured if I gave you an English word, you'd say, oh, I can, I can't, and so on. I had to give you a word, it seems like it worked, where you got no idea what I'm saying. Nobody knows what a parapluie is. It's, in English, it's an umbrella. Okay? So I've lost my umbrella. But I ruined it now. I've lost my parapluie. Can you help me find it? Now you can. Because you know what I'm talking about. So you can search for the umbrella if you know the umbrella. But you can't search for the umbrella if you don't know what an umbrella is. This is what's called the Meno paradox. You can't search for something unless you already have it. So in our instance, we're imagining Alice searching for the best teacher. And we're simplifying it down to two choices, alpha and beta, Socrates and Thrasymachus. She's searching for the best teacher, but she can't make a good choice unless what? I can't find my umbrella unless I already know my umbrella. So I can't find the best teacher unless I already know who's the best teacher. So we haven't made any progress. That's just the paradox. But in the Meno, there's a solution. And the solution operates in this dialogue too. That's why I'm telling it to you, because it will deepen our understanding, enhance our understanding. We already know who the best teacher is. That's the only way we could make a choice. A sensible choice. So either it's just random, or we make sensible choices. And the reason why sometimes we make sensible choices, he's not saying we always do, but the only way we could ever make sensible choices, unless it were just random, is that we've forgotten. We once knew, but we have a dim memory. And our desire is still attached to that experience. And that's why he's saying, trust your instincts. If you're faced with two teachers, and just something is drawing you to him and repelling you from me, trust that. Now, it could be mistaken. It could be a perverted desire that ends up leading you down the wrong path. But it's all you have. Plato's saying, trust that that desire in you is a dim memory of an acquaintance, a familiarity you once had with real beauty. Because Plato thinks we've all been here before. We've all been, if you like, to heaven. I don't know what the Japanese word would be for that.
私たちは昔は天国にいたと。
天国こっち側外の世界にいたってことだよね。
Even the English word has problems when it comes to Plato, but I don't know what the Japanese word is, so it'll have problems too, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Plato thinks we've all been to heaven before. And when you're in a human body, it's because you've been reborn into this cave, and that the purpose of life is to come back to heaven. And the only way you can find it is by remembering where it is. And that people can help you find it. Those are the teachers. And when you have to choose between two teachers or 10 teachers, trust your memory, trust your instincts, whatever you want to call it, but ultimately he thinks it's a memory, because you've already been there. So the one that helps you remember something that's already inside of you is the real teacher. So education, his formula is education is not putting stuff in the soul, it's turning the soul around. It happens thanks to a teacher And the teacher is the one that you're drawn to because that teacher helps you remember where you've already been. So this is certainly contact with Buddhism because of the reincarnation doctrine.
まあ、今言われたのはプラトンの早期というやつよね、まあ、思い起こすというか。でまあ、ちょっとそのなんやもともとここにいてこっちになんかリボーンとか言ってなんかこう輪廻の考えがあるんですよ、中にプラトンって。だからもう一回こう全てを忘れてもうその洞窟の奥に生まれ変わるみたいなね、それをまた元の場所を思い出さないといけないと、それを助けるのが教師だみたいな話ですよね。でそれがまあ無機会値のこの教育の定義になっているので、まあ、方向転換をしてこっち側に行くみたいな。はい。
So, when I responded to your question earlier, which I guess I misunderstood, but I said at that moment, the content doesn't matter. The teacher's job is to turn you around. And that's why I said the Zen monk who just whaps you on the head, that would be like, you're so deep in your illusion, there's nothing I can say to you. This is a real problem that we experience as teachers, where I can tell sometimes with a student, very, thinking of particular people, but it doesn't matter, smart kids, they get a lot of what I'm saying, but they don't get it. I didn't put that well. I talk a lot, and then we have an exam, and then they give all the right answers on the exam. But I can tell they don't get it. That is a problem of somebody who is very smart, but doesn't have a strong desire to leave. So when I speak, imagine I'm a teacher, and I'm speaking. They hear me as coming from this. It's like the echo is off the wall. And they think everything that I'm saying is about this. And so they're very good at repeating what they've heard echoing off the wall. And I'm not a Zen monk, but I'm just kind of imagining why, because I used to wonder this when I learned about Zen Buddhism, why do they hit them on the head? I don't understand. How does that teach you anything? Well, now that I've been a teacher for 30 years, I know, not necessarily I'm not a Zen Buddhist, but I know what it's like to be so frustrated with a student who's very smart, who anything I say, they convert it into this. And I imagine that Zen Buddhist technique is, you gotta break with that somehow. And words are not gonna break you. This desire for wisdom. And again, I'm looking at other teachers. I think Plato thinks the teacher is not gonna just free you. Nobody, the attraction to the images in everybody is so strong. It's because it's like, you believe in Santa Claus, but it's your whole world. I think the teacher can only be there to help somebody who is already starting to turn. And I think people only start to turn when this has become so disappointing and even so painful. I find students very easy to teach when they're dissatisfied. The hardest ones to teach are the ones who are very smart and very satisfied. But when a student is, being smart helps, but when a student is dissatisfied, is longing for something, and nothing in the image world is satisfying that longing. So I could talk about the cave all day, but I will start at the beginning of the dialogue, but only if you've satisfied yourself, you have any questions left. It'll come up over and over again. We'll talk about it all semester, all course, but is there anything particular right now?
So what you said was like the answer is not on the wall. The
No.
answer is not on your mouse.
That's
on
right.
your
That's right.
students.
The answer is an experience. How do you give someone an experience? You can't. You can create circumstances where they're likely to have the experience, or they're more likely than not to have the experience, but you can't give them the experience. As a teacher, so much is out of our control, and that's such a relief. Because if you think it's in your control, as I used to, you feel very responsible. But once you realize it's mostly out of your control, what a relief. I'll do my best, and people will bring to the classroom what they have. And maybe it will be good for them, maybe it won't.
Like, what would you say, what would you respond to this question? You know, is the nature of tree, let's say tree, the nature of tree
Yeah.
is just one kind of perceivable kind of stuff that
Yes.
everyone can see at the same time, or just like every single person will gonna reminds the different
Yes.
kind of nature of
Yes.
the tree.
Yes.
Well, is it the same nature with the other person who is trying to remind that one?
For Plato, yes.
Mm.
For Plato, yes.
Mm.
Let me say a little bit about Buddhism in connection with this question, because I did promise this on the syllabus. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about it. So there's a dialogue called the Milindapana, which I think is just a dialogue with King Milinda. And the other character in the dialogue is Nagasena, who's a monk. Are you familiar with this dialogue?
まあ、これはミリンダ王への問いやったかな。ミリンダ王というのはギリシャ系、インドアレクサンドロス大王の軍勢がインドまで行ったんですよ。でアレクサンドロスはそこで亡くなったのかな。で、しかし一部のギリシャ人たちがその後に居残ったんですよね。でそれで国を作って、でその王様がミリンダ王、一人の王様で、哲学的なんです、その人はギリシャ人で。ナーガセーナという、仏教層と対話をしてなんか議論をして、それは結構な太さの本で残ってるんですよね。
I'll take that as a yes.
I didn't read it.
Okay, that's fine. Nagasena comes, well, that way you won't correct me if I get it wrong. Nagasena is invited by the king to the court. And the king has heard that Nagasena is wise and he wants to learn from him. And when Nagasena arrives, I actually got it wrong. I think the king comes to him, the king comes to Nagasena, which is remarkable. And he comes in a chariot. And he says, "Are you Nagasena?" And Nagasena says, "Well, that's what people call me." And the king is confused. Well, are you or aren't you Nagasena? And Nagasena uses this as an opportunity to teach the king the Buddhist doctrine of no self. So Plato thinks, by contrast, you have a self, you have a soul. And in Buddhism, at least as I understand it, certainly in this dialogue, there is no soul. There's not even a self. And if you think that there's a self, that's an illusion. So how does Nagasena teach this doctrine to Milinda, King Milinda? He says, this chariot you've arrived in, show it to me. And it's right there. And so King Milinda points, and Nagasena says, well, you're pointing at the seat. I want to, show me the chariot. And the king points at different things. Well, you're just pointing at the wheels. You're just pointing at the axle. You're just pointing at the, plank, whatever. What Nagasena is getting at is that there's a bunch of stuff. But that's not the chariot, because you could take that stuff, take it apart, throw it all in the corner, there'd be a heap of wood. That's not a chariot. So show me the chariot. And Melinda's confused. Well, the answer is, the chariot is that stuff arranged as a chariot. So the chariot then is not the stuff, it's the arrangement. That sounds like a good answer, but the Nagasena's point is, okay, king, show me the arrangement. He points, no, you already showed me the stuff. Now show me, where's the arrangement? Like, here's the water bottle, here's the watch, now show me the arrangement. The order, the form. Nagasena's point is, there's no such thing. And then, to go back to the no-self doctrine, his point is, you, King Milinda, are asking me if I'm Nagasena. Well, there's an arm, there's a leg, there's a mouth, just like there's a wheel and there's a seat and a plank and so on. But I'm like a chariot. There's this stuff, and if you were to cut me up and throw all the body parts in the corner, that wouldn't be me. It's this stuff in an arrangement. So show me the arrangement. Show me Nagasena without the body parts. And the Buddhist lesson is, there's no such thing. This is to overcome the idea that there's a you. Because if you think there's a you think bad things can happen to it, and it makes you anxious. But if you can overcome the idea that there's a you, you'll never be anxious, because you can never be harmed, because there's no you. A big difference between Plato and Buddhism, then, is that Plato thinks there is an arrangement. There is a self, but they're not visible. They're not, you can't smell them, you can't touch them, you can't taste them. They're in reality, which is spiritual. Spiritual in the English sense of not physical.
ちょっと今の説明した方がいいかな。右顔と長瀬名のタイル、どっちがチャリオットっていうのはこの戦車の馬で引くなんか昔のなんかありますよね。いわゆる戦車ですよ。それのことなんです。それは何だい？要するに誰のどっちの質問？王が長瀬名が
言ってそのチャリオットを見せてくれって言ったら王がその座席みたいなのを指してくれる。
いろんな部分を指したけどバラバラにしたらこう木の山なんだよね。そのチャリオットはどこにあるのかというとアレンジメントとどうやってたよね。なんか作り方骨組みというかなんかそれがチャリオットじゃないか。まあ仏教ではそれはなんか存在しないみたいな。それはだから事故はあるかないかっていう話をしてたので、その事故もそのアレンジメントだみたいな、こうバラバラにしたら肉の塊なんで、そのアレンジメントはまあプラトンだったらあるんだらしい。プラトンは事故はあるんだから、それは目に見えない。こっちまあイデアの世界、こっち側の方スピリチュアルっていう点でまあ要するに物質を超えた点ではあるっていうことなんやけども、そのまあ仏教ではそういうものもまあ認めないみたいな。そういう根本的な考えの違いはある。
So I use this word arrangement because it's in the translation of the Milindapanha that I read in English, but the same notion is the order or the form. You may have heard of Plato's doctrine of the forms. It could also be Plato's doctrine of the arrangements or Plato's doctrine of the orders. If you can think of a chariot as having not just parts, but a thing that those parts sharing, that's more real than the parts. Think of it as like a spiritual thing, that the chariot that you see is like an image of the spiritual chariot. That's what Plato thinks reality is like. Now, we can go back to that if you have questions, but I'll tell you now why I brought this up. I can't remember your precise question now, but you talked about different people's perceptions of things. Do you remember the question?
Yeah, like so, like idea like that we are seeking for is plural or just a simple idea, you know, like just one idea or just like little idea.
Right. Okay. So take justice. There's a notion of justice that you have, there's a notion of justice that you have, there's a Japanese notion of justice, there's an American notion of justice. People disagree about how we should interact, what the laws should be, and so on. And so that would be a case where it seems like there are simply different ideas. Thrasymachus thinks that's it, they're just different ideas, and they're all put forward by puppeteers. We'll maybe get to that today. Plato thinks, Socrates thinks in this dialogue, no, there's just one justice. And of course he grants, people have different ideas of justice, but some are right and some are wrong. The reason I brought up all that about the chariots is that Thrasymachus, the sophists, are like the Buddhists, they're like Nagasena in the sense that they're looking at the parts, different parts of the chariot, but no thing chariot. They're looking at lots of ideas of justice, but no thing justice. Socrates, on the other hand, thinks lots of chariot parts, but there's a thing chariot. Lots of ideas of justice, but there's a thing justice. And that's what reality is. It's the realities, the true things. Now just a cautionary note, Plato doesn't think there's a true chariot. That's just a custom. Like take a car. There was no true car in the 19th century, 18th century. There are no cars in the 18th, automobile. We invented that. So it'd be pretty absurd if there was a heaven full of the true car and the true iPhone and so on. Those are, what we say in English, artifacts. We make them. And if we think something's an iPhone, then it's an iPhone. And if we don't think it's an iPhone, it's not an iPhone. We make those things, we can break those things. Plato agrees, but Plato thinks there are some things that are eternal, that we didn't make, that are real. And we live in the shadows of those things. And justice is the one that this dialogue is about. The question in Book 1, that we'll get to in a moment, what is justice? Well, these various characters are each going to say, well, I think justice is this, I think justice is that. Socrates is going to wind his way with his logic through all of those definitions. But the reason he's doing that is he's trying to lead them out to see true justice. But based on what we were saying about education, these people are in a cave. They think when they say justice is this or that, they believe that. He's got to somehow implant doubt in them so that they recognize they don't have any idea what justice is because they've never seen it.
Well, この本はね、正義とは何かっていうのが大きなテーマです。でも大半は教育の話をしてるんですけどね。正しい正義、あるという立場なんだけども、セネカの話です。ソフィストのセネカはないみたいなね。正しい正義はないんだみたいな。多様性のなんかね、多様だっていうことは認める。それ自体がないみたいな。そういう立場の違いがあって、プラトの場合イデアとか言うわけですよ。元になるものはイデアなので、イデア見えないんですよね。見えたものはイデアが形をとっているので、不十分なものでしかない。そういうのフォームと書いてる、イデアと書いてないから、アリストテレスだったらそれは形相とか言うんですよ。形相はフォームなんですよね。
So I heard sophist in that, and that allows me to make a point that I wanted to make. I didn't think I would get to, but why not? Protagoras is a sophist. We'll talk a little bit more about those people in a moment. He's a contemporary of Socrates. So these men lived in the 5th century BC. He was considered a great teacher. Thrasymachus is another sophist. So there's this school of types of teachers called sophists. And Socrates was not a sophist. Plato just makes this point over and over again in his dialogues. Socrates is not a sophist. And the reason he's doing that is that the typical Athenian looked at these men and they thought they were all doing the same thing. They didn't realize that there was a crucial difference. And we have a diagram for the crucial difference. From the perspective of these people, these teachers look like kind of crazy people who make people not obey the customs. And so remember, it's gone now, but Socrates was charged with corrupting the youth, getting the youth to be full of doubts about the religion, about the heroes, and so on. Well, they had the same problem with the sophists. So to them, to your average Athenian, your average Greek of this period, they looked at the sophists and the philosophers and they said, well, they're doing the same thing. But Plato wanted to say, and he says it over and over again, including in this dialogue, fundamental difference, because although the sophists will try and break you from these conventions, their education stops there. They're just trying to teach you how to become a master, how to become a puppeteer. Socrates was different. He tried to teach you what true wisdom was, what reality was. And the fundamental disagreement is one that we've just broached, which is Plato believes there are these realities, the orders, the forms. And above all, the sun, which as I mentioned, it's gone now too, but at the end of book 6 is talking about the sun. But in the cave, here it is as the source of all seeing of everything, but also all being of everything. Everything in this story relies on the sun for its being and for its ability to be known. This in Plato is going to be called the good. And not much is lost by thinking of this as God. There are some small differences, but I think for a first course in Plato, for now, Plato thinks God is the most real thing. God is responsible for the existence and the nature of everything. God is responsible for the intelligibility of everything. In other words, its ability to be known, because the light shines and makes it possible for us to see. So the difference between Protagoras and Socrates, or Socrates and Thrasymachus, because these men are connected, they're both sophists. The difference is about this. Socrates thinks God exists, God is the most real. Without appreciating that, you will forever be in a cave. These men think God is not real. God is an illusion. He's just another image that puppeteers project to control people. So their accusation, we'll see it from Thrasymachus, against Socrates is, if you follow that man Socrates, he will lead you to 50 years of this, which is a nothing. It's just a trick. We'll see a lot about Protagoras soon, but here is the famous dictum of Protagoras. Man is the measure of all things. How would you translate that?
Could you say that again?
Yeah.
人間は万物の尺度だっていうのが
I'll do the second part. Of things that are that they are, of things that are not that they are not. It's somewhat oracular. Let me give you an example.
違う
So, if someone in America were to find this on the street, it wouldn't be worth anything. So in America, we judge that this is just a piece of paper. Imagine that you can't go to the bank and get it transferred. So in America, we measure this, we esteem it, we judge it to be nothing. It's just a piece of paper. So in America, we are the judge of the things that are. That they are. Namely, does this have value? In America, we say no. Of the things that are not, that they are not. We judge it doesn't have value, so it doesn't have value for us. Because man is the measure. We, human beings, give value to things. Things don't have value in their own respect. By contrast, and it's a somewhat disanalogy, it's not going to work. Because I assume if you find this on the street in Japan, you see value in that. No? Is that recognized, the American money?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so. That's the difference. Among many others. But Americans would just look and just think, what in the world is this? A better example would be, my sister visited Thailand and she came back and she gave my kids a stack of bills that looked like this to me. And my kids were very excited, and I got very excited too, and we went on the internet and we found out they were worth pennies. You know, it was like a million whatever, but they were worth pennies. Because to us, we couldn't tell the difference. To us, same value. But to you, and now to me, because I'm living here, a lot of value. So this example I've just given you with money, Protagoras is saying we give value to pieces of paper, and if we give the value, they have value. If we don't give the value, they don't have any value. Protagoras is saying that's true of everything. So bring one of these back to Athens and put it in the temple, put it on the street. It wouldn't mean anything to any of them. It would be worthless. They wouldn't even know what it is. And so to them, it wouldn't be a thing. It'd be just like a weird rock. That's the sophist view. That man is the measure. If human beings create the illusion that this has value, then it has value. If human beings don't create that illusion, then it doesn't have value. So for the sophist, that's the end of the story. Whereas for Socrates, there's more. And I'll give you the example of justice. There are Japanese laws, there are American laws. They're different. You better follow the Japanese laws while you're in Japan. But some of them you don't need to follow in America because we don't have those laws, and vice versa. For Thrasymachus and for Protagoras, that's the end of the story. Justice is simply what the people in power say it is. But Plato thinks there's more. There's what is actually just, what is truly just, real justice. And that's why some societies are better than others. Some come closer to that ideal, others fall farther away from that ideal. And those are the two types of education that this dialogue is about. I mean, naturally, it's going to be mostly about this, because it's Plato. But this is always in the background. So that was my way of answering your question about different ideas that people have. This dialogue is going to be showing that for some things, there's a reality.
So like, I don't know if I understood correctly, but like we're Japanese are seeking for Japanese yen. So American, you know, is looking for dollars maybe,
Yes.
but these are different. Maybe, you know, kind of, this is like plural ideas here.
Yes?
But if that's the case, that's the end of education, you know what I mean? You know.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
If you, yeah.
If I may, imagine Japanese education, whose goal is to train Japanese to be very good at identifying the images that Japanese rulers project. Be very different from American education. Different rulers, different images, different skills, different aptitudes, and so on. Plato says, yeah, absolutely, that's true, but that's not real education. This is real education. And the more you focus on adapting to your society, the farther away you'll be from understanding what true education is.
So like, it looks like there are two or plural ideas here, you know, your Japanese yen, like, or like euros or like dollars here, it looks like there are three ideas in front of us,
Yes.
but what's behind it is like we're looking at, I don't know, something value, you know, like
Yes.
something like illustrating the value on the paper.
Yes.
Like we're seeking for what's behind it again and again,
Yes.
over and again.
Yes.
And we're mostly every single people, whether or not he or she is in Japan or America, Europe, they're all seeking for like something behind it, something behind
Yes.
that paper.
Yes.
That is the idea.
Okay.
That is the sun, if I understood correctly.
I was with you right up to that point. I mean, you're right that that's what Plato thinks. But what if there is no God? Or what if there is no good? What if there's no real thing that's true value? There's just Japan and America and Europe, and they give different values to different things. Plato and Thrasymachus would agree, the people are seeking something that's kind of behind this. So this piece of paper, even in Japan, what value is filling up your room with these for their own sake? No, they're there as tokens of value. You get something with them. What is it that you're looking for? Now, people want different things, but Thrasymachus' lesson, as we'll see, is that the thing that you should want, because this is the key to all the other wants, is power. What the puppeteers have is power, because they can create realities for people. And if you can create someone's reality, you control them. You're the master, they're the slave. So what we have with Thrasymachus and Plato are two visions of what's good. For Plato, God, whatever that is. And for Thrasymachus, power, whatever that is.
What's behind the power?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. Well, just like there's nothing behind God.
Yeah.
We'll get to this later, but now's a perfect time to introduce the idea. What makes someone powerful? It's not a rhetorical question. I mean, if you can answer that question, you get what he's ultimately going to say. It's nice to do it first. What makes someone powerful?
Something kind of like language, which is perceivable, you know. It doesn't look like have a power like the God, the Son, in this context. Looks like it doesn't have a power, you know. But let's say like, you know.
Who's your current prime minister? You have a new one, right?
Mm.
What's his name?
Hmm?
What's the new prime minister's name? I don't.
Shigeru.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's more powerful than you, right?
Yeah.
Why? Let me help you. When you go to, in Tokyo, I presume, there's a chamber in America, it's called Congress, the White House, whatever, where the decisions are made. What's it called?
国会
Okay. If you go to Tokyo to that place and you say, from now on, this is how it's going to be, what will happen if you do that? I'll make it easier.
Yeah.
What's the name of the prime minister? Shinguru?
茂石破 Mr. 石破
Ishiba? If Ishiba stands in the right place in that building and he says, this is how it's going to be, here's what we're going to do, what happens? What's that?
Election.
Well, he wins the election. He just won the election, right? So the election's over, and now he's in power. And he says, this is what we're going to do. This is how I'm going to spend the money. This is, you people are going to do this. You people are going to do that. By the end of the year, I want this to happen. Well, what happens?
Well, he said it's going to happen.
What he said is going to happen. because the people think of him as powerful. And when you think of somebody as powerful, you do what the powerful person says. When you step into that position and you say the same things, what will happen?
I'm gonna be arrested.
Yeah, first of all, nothing, but then you'll be arrested. Because nobody thinks of you as powerful in this context. All power is people think you're powerful. If somehow, his name again, the Prime Minister? Ishiba. If somehow Ishiba was disgraced, and overnight nobody respected him, and somehow, all of a sudden, everybody sees you as powerful. Let's say you invent a cure for cancer and defeat all your enemies and so on. People are like, wow, this guy, and they listen to you. Well, now you're powerful. There's nothing behind power except that people think you're powerful. Man is the measure of all things. If people measure you as powerful, you're powerful. Of the things that they are. If they don't measure you as powerful, you're not powerful. So what's behind power is the way things seem to people. By contrast, there's nothing behind God as Plato understands him, because God will go on no matter how he seems to us. So to summarize, these two types of education, which we'll explore, this isn't the end, this is just the beginning, but these two types of education, one is saying, I will lead you to true goodness, but you're going to have to give up power, and you're going to have to give up money and fame and honor and victory and so on, because those things are won down here. That's Socrates, who lived that life. He lost his life because he sought that. He had to reject this. By contrast, Thrasymachus is saying, I will teach you how to become powerful. And lesson number one, if you want to be powerful, is don't believe in that. Because that's going to make you do all kinds of stuff that's going to harm your ability to make money and to become famous and to become victorious against your enemies. You can talk like you believe in that. It's going to be very useful for creating a reality, because after all, if you can convince people of certain religious truths that you've invented that serve you, that's the ultimate mind control.
So is it like seamless revolution?
Tell me what you mean, seamless liberation.
Liberation, like to break the wall, break the power,
Yes.
break the paper, over and again. Maybe we cannot express like what education is, what the God is, what
Yeah.
the paper is.
Yeah.
No one can perceive whoever it might be. But we just like, all we can do is just continue to break the wall again and again. That's what I call seamless revolution.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
That would be like being in doubt, wherever that was, forever. And both Socrates and Thrasymachus would think that's a trap. Because if you're in doubt forever, you're not making the journey that you need to make to find God. And Thrasymachus would say, you're not doing what it takes to, which is make decisions.
That's yeah. So forever is not appropriate, but yeah, kind of, I don't know how to say, but yeah.
That idea of perpetual doubt or seamless liberation, as I
Revolution, yeah.
that's in antiquity, in Greek philosophy, that's called skepticism.
Mhm.
And Plato founded an academy, the first university, and it had various phases. But its longest, most prosperous phase, it was known as a skeptical academy. And it's called academic skepticism now.
Mhm.
Cicero, if you're familiar with that name from Roman history, he was a Platonist. This is not usually known, but his Platonism was academic skepticism. This just means Platonic skepticism. And I think that's the right interpretation, understood this way. Be relentlessly skeptical about all of this, but don't stop there, don't doubt forever. That would be just pure skepticism. The academic part, the Platonic part, was put your doubt in the service of destroying these images so that you can escape to reality.
Academic skepticism
Yeah,
and
skepticism.
skepticism.
Yeah.
These are different.
Yeah, so there's the Platonic
Okay.
is academic skepticism. Then there's Pyrrhonian skepticism. That's named after a 4th century figure named Pyrrho. I'll tell you about Pyrrho, because this will make the contrast clear. Pyrrho told a story. It's the story that makes it clear. Alexander the Great had a painter. I forget the name of the painter for the moment. But Alexander had a horse that he loved. I forget the name of the horse. But at any rate, this painter was trying to paint the foam. You know, when horses get, they exercise, there's foam around their mouth. And I guess after a certain battle, there's a lot of foam and he was trying to paint the battle scene. And he couldn't paint the foam. If you've done any painting, I'm not a painter, but I did it in high school. It's hard to paint clouds and foam. It's hard to give the appearance of lightness using a brush. So he was having trouble doing that. And the way that he got so frustrated, he took the brush and he just threw it at the canvas, it hit the horse, and it made the perfect foam. That's Pyrrhonian skepticism. Namely, the effort to achieve knowledge will only frustrate you because it's doubt forever. Everything has problems, everything is full of holes. You won't achieve wisdom until you've just tried, and you finally got this, you're so frustrated you just give up. And then you've achieved nirvana. You've achieved peace because you've recognized it's futile. That's not Plato. For Plato, you criticize because it's all fake, so that you can leave the cave and achieve union with God.
ちょっと今のプラトンの会議は、スケプティシズムって会議論、聞け論としてですね、シセロと書いて聞け論。で、批判をしていくみたいな話。こっちがちょっとよくわかんないので、
プラトニック。
誰やろ？こっち側の人の名前は分からへん。
ニルバーナって言ってましたけど、なんか。
ニルバーナ。
Did you say Nirvana? But
I said nirvana. It just as this reminds me of Buddhism.
なんか。
知らないの。4世紀かなんか言ってたよね。
In this sense, if I may. Back to the Milindapana and the Buddhist notion that there's no self.
フィロンとかね、フィロンという人がいる。フィロンかな。
Philosophers, at least in Greece, were very interested in the soul and what is the true soul? Who are you really? And Pyrrho thinks that's a pointless question. There is no answer to that question. And it's not until you ask that question relentlessly and throw doubt after doubt at it that you can just let go of the desire for there to be a self. In that sense, it seems Buddhist to me. Because it's not just about the self, it's about the nature of anything.
空ってやつです。
いやー、ちょっとなんかそこら辺、仏教はなんちゅうの、ただ疑うだけではないところがあるので、もちろん、現実はなんか、全て嘘だみたいなところがあるんやけど、その先があるので、それでは話は終わらないと、いいです。ちょっといろいろ考えてみます。なんか例えてたでしょ、ピロ
絵をアレキサンダー大王が絵描きさんを雇っていて、talking about the painter.
Oh, okay, sure.
でその人がその戦闘シーンを絵に描いていたんだけれども、ここのところをどう うしてもこううまく書けないで、それですごくフラストレーションに陥ってしまって、それでその持ってた筆をバーンって投げたら、その時にパーフェクトなその絵が描けたっていうような、そういう例え話をしてもらって、だからそのどっちの方かわからないんですけど、そのそうこっちの方もその何かそのこう何かこうブレイクした時に初めてこうその大事が解けるっていうか。
You've maybe seen that. That's Alexander and his horse Bucephalus. It's one of the most beautiful. It's a mosaic, and paintings very rarely survive from ancient Greece, but the mosaics survive.
モザイクでこう復元されて。
これだから田村君が質問したのは革命みたいなこと言ってて、
なんか
革命はどこなんだみたいな。でも結構革命ってだからそれの答えでなんかそれはなんかこのスケプティシズムの話になったんだよね。批判とかね。
君のなんかそのイデア向こうにある3とか5個の方に多分向かうためのスケプティズムがいわゆるプラトニックアカデミックの方でやっぱ壁をとりあえずただ疑うっていうのがいわゆる単なるスケプティズムみたいな。
それは教育でも批判教育とかな、そんなのがあるんだけど、結局そのパワーを批判するわけよ。でパワーを批判するけどこっちに出ていってなんか先があるという発想がないので、要するにパワーが入れ替わるだけなんで、また別のパワーができて、でそれを批判するみたいな、だからそれの繰り返しになるので、まあ、その先を信じるかどうかという問題はある、信じればその先がこれを一旦取り外して向こうがあるんだけども、それ信じなかったらここばっかりを問題にして、それを改良するとかね、改善するとか、それで話が終わるみたいな、こういうのがいい。
And let's have a face like behind like something we are seeking for, like such as sun and gods,
Yes.
like idea, something like that. Yeah. Let's have a face.
Let's have a face.
Face, yeah. Like there's a sun, there's a gods, there's an idea
Yes.
behind it. Let's go for it. Let's move on to the idea.
Yes.
That's what I meant. Like let's have a face. You know.
Let's have a face. I'm still trying to understand. Like, do you want this to be a human being?
Yeah,
Like Jesus, for example?
yeah, like
If we don't have faith, there is something beyond, like the sun, the
Oh.
good. If we don't believe that,
Yes.
we are in a perpetual skepticism,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
that's
I see. Yes. Yes. So we're close to the time. I'll just say one more thing. We didn't do it at the beginning but we'll do that on Monday. I'll go back to the question that you asked, the scholarly question about where does the Republic fit in Plato's career? And as I say, the chronological interpretation was one. Some people still believe it. But now I can tell you why I believe in the pedagogical interpretation. Those aporetic, those dialogues that end in aporia, in confusion, now you can see what I was referring to. Those are dialogues for people here. Those are dialogues to induce confusion in you about things that you think you know. Because the first way of loosening the bond is by implanting some doubt. Still somewhere here. Once the doubt has been implanted and you started to turn around, then you need something. You need some guidance towards the truth. That's what those middle dialogues are for. And the Republic is one of those. And then the late dialogues are another thing we need to get into, and it becomes more skeptical again. But they're for different students at different stages in their career. Some people need to learn for the first time that they don't know. Other students, having acquired that lesson of humility, let's say, then need guidance to point them towards this. Because Plato thinks it's very, very dangerous skepticism. If you're given skepticism without guidance, you'll end up like Thrasymachus. Because there's something about human nature, which we'll discuss in book 4. There's something about human nature that draws us to power and to money and to fame. And that if you don't have a strong formation that points you in this direction, skepticism will just lead you to become a puppeteer.
We don't know like that's kind of wars can be verbalized or not, but we hope that can be verbalized in the future.
What do you mean bobblized?
Like put the form like on what we are seeking for, like
Yes.
kind of like answer.
Yes.
Answer has the word sentence.
Yeah.
We're not sure if we can have a answer with sentence or words,
Yes.
but we hope that there's an answer.
Yes. So, as I mentioned from the beginning, this is, if someone follows this path, they have to do so with faith. Although I added, it's not just faith, it's a memory, if this is true. It's a memory that you feel as a desire. And the desire is to go home. If you feel
Okay.
that you are wandering and it's time to go home, I think that really gets at the feeling that Plato is trying to
Okay.
convey.
Yeah. It's more like desire. It's more like desire than the hope on the face. That is what you meant.
Yeah, the desire gives you the hope, perhaps. Yes.
Desire to come back to home.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, should we stop there for today? Okay.